I need to share this before I convince myself that it didn't happen. This happened in December last year. I was visiting my uncle in northern Minnesota, near the Canadian border. He's the kind of guy who prefers solitude, lives in a cabin deep in the woods, no close neighbors, just the trees and whatever lives in them. I never minded visiting. I like the quiet, in fact. But after that night, I don't think that I'll ever be going back. It was the coldest night of the year that night, at least negative 30 degrees. My uncle had gone into town for supplies, so I was alone. The cabin was warm though, the fire crackling, and I was scrolling on my phone when I heard it. Something moving outside. Not footsteps, more like a dragging sound, slow and deliberate. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then came the knock. Not at the door, at the window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. My uncle's nearest neighbor was miles away, and no sane person would ever be out in that cold. But the knocking came again. I reached for my flashlight and shined it through the window. And man, I wish that I hadn't. There was something standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, but completely emaciated, with long, bony limbs. Its skin looked frostbitten, almost blackened in fact, and its eyes were glowing, not reflecting light, glowing on their own, like embers buried in a dying fire. I should have looked away. I should have closed the curtains, but I was frozen, staring, unable to breathe. And then it smiled. Its teeth were too many, too sharp, stretching across its face. It opened its mouth wider than any human should, and then it said something that I perceived to be "let me in." The voice didn't match the body. It sounded wrong, like a recording playing at the wrong speed, too deep and too garbled. I instantly ran. I grabbed my uncle's rifle, locked the door, and I backed into the farthest corner of the room. The knocking eventually stopped, but I could hear something scraping against the walls outside, slow and patient, like it had all the time in the world. I sat there for what felt like hours, rifle shaking in my hands, until my uncle finally came back. The second that his headlight swept across those trees, the noises instantly stopped. He found me pale, sweating and gripping the gun like my life depended on it. I told him everything. He didn't say a word, just nodded and checked around the cabin. And when he came back, he looked unsettled. "There are no tracks in the snow," he said. "Nothing." That was impossible, though. I mean, I heard it, I saw it, but there was nothing outside, no footprints, no marks on the walls, just the untouched snow and the silent watching trees. I left the next morning, and I haven't been back since. My uncle, bless his soul, still lives there, but he told me something before I left. He said, "If you ever hear it again, don't look, and whatever you do, never let it in." I have never told anybody else about this until now, but I know what I saw, and I know that whatever it was, it's definitely still out there somewhere. For context, this was on my grandparents' property that had tons of negative things happen. Most of it is not my place to share or say, but what I will say is that my grandparents' parents used to own even more than my grandparents do now. One chunk of the property was sold behind my family's back, and another part of the property was a now common swim hole that we had to sell to the government for some reason I'm not aware of. But the rest of the property was split among my great-grandparents' 3 sons. One selling it behind the family's back, and the other turned it into a farm and dentist office. My grandfather's portion of the property has 2 of his sons' houses living there. One of my uncles had a bunch of stuff happen that, again, is not my place to say, and my other uncle's house used to belong to my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother died in that house, and later the house was remodeled to fit my uncle, his wife, and 2 children in it. There's no need to keep going on because a bunch of stuff happened over the different properties and hundreds of acres. But me and all my cousins had seen unexplainable things there. I've caught ghost photos, and my cousins have played with Ouija boards all over that property multiple times. I have had hundreds of stories from this place, but this one always throws me for a bit of a loop. So this happened around March time. My other great-grandmother had just died due to a heart attack on her way to the hospital, so my family had to come and stay a few days for her funeral. My grandparents used to have this vehicle that we call the Bowder. I was driving the Bowder that night and going down the different gravel roads through the grassy fields and forests to drop all my cousins off at their houses, since they had all come that day to visit. I was approaching the first cousin's house, only to slam the brakes when I saw something absolutely terrifying. The best way that I can describe the pure size and massive mass of this creature is to describe this dog that we used to have on the property, a Rottweiler. This Rottweiler was massive and could stand mid-chest to you on all fours. The mass of this creature was almost like as if you picked up that dog and held it in front of you to make it seem like it was standing on a grassy hill about 50 to 100 feet away. The creature was maybe about 3 to 4 times the size of that Rottweiler. Its fur was pure black and exactly the shape and build of the Rottweiler, but it had deep red eyes that you could hardly see in the dark, and it slowly walked across the grassy hill until it disappeared into the forest. I looked at my cousins, face white as paper. "Did you see that?" I asked. They looked at me confused and collectively said no. I took them home and was anxious the entire time on the lonely and dark drive back home to the main building. The next day, we had my great-grandmother's visitation, and after my family and cousins ate supper at my grandmother's house, me and my cousins decided to go to the same grassy field that night together to reflect on the recent death and just spend some quality time to wind down and relax a bit. My cousin was being stupid, turning off headlights to the Bowder for short periods of time, saying that she could see due to the bright moonlight that night. And that night was the night that we crashed into a ditch. The exact day after I saw the big black dog that I assume was probably some sort of a hellhound or something. Luckily, we managed to get the Bowder out of the ditch and drove the rest of the night in silence. Except for my cousins yelling at me for being no help to get the vehicle out of the ditch. To be honest though, I was crouched in the corner, sort of panicking. I thought that maybe we would see that thing again, and I just didn't want to be there, stuck and stranded like that. So, if anyone thinks that this is anything other than a hellhound, then I would love to hear your theories, because this is the best that I've been able to come up with all these years later. So my husband and I stayed up pretty late the other night, binging a show. We finally decided to head to bed. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door and turned the fan on, then laid my head down while he headed to the kitchen to fill up his water bottle. And the second that I laid my head down, I heard what can only be described as a demonic, something out of a horror movie, scream coming from downstairs. I was frozen in fear for a moment, then decided to text my husband and ask if he heard it too. He immediately texted me at the same time to confirm that he had heard it, and as soon as he did, he bolted to the living room to check on our 2-year-old daughter, as she had fallen asleep on the couch, to find her passed out, mouth open and snoring. So we know that it couldn't have come from her. Not that she could make that kind of a sound to begin with, but we were just trying to make sense of it. But it did come from our living room, that much was clear. I sort of feel actually insane explaining it because it felt like something that only happens in horror movies. I mean, I've never experienced this before. We live in the city and it was -35 that night, so we definitely had all of our windows shut. The sound didn't come from outside, in other words. We ruled out any animal noises as we don't have a ton of foxes in the areas, and let alone in the city. Our home is 114 years old, and right across the back alley from a funeral home, selling point for us. And when we first moved in, our neighbors and a few others had stated that the house was haunted, but in the past 2 years that we've lived here, we've never experienced anything terrifying. I mean, the odd shadow figure in our peripherals, sounds that could be easily chalked up to our cats. Sleep paralysis has frequented me more often, but as for paranormal activity, I wouldn't confirm our house is necessarily haunted. It hasn't happened since. We're both extremely confused and honestly slightly terrified as well. I did smudge our home heavily the next morning, windows open, and let out the stagnant energy. But does anyone have any ideas of what this could have possibly been, if not a terrifying paranormal event? My family has houses both in Mexico and Texas, so I alternate between the US and Mexico very frequently. On normal weeks, I just cross the border from Mexico to Texas to go to school, and then I come back to Mexico. I spend most of my time in Mexico, so naturally I'm quite used to cartel presence and all that. I'm used to calling off nights out with friends due to cartel-related shootings and stuff like that. It just no longer surprises me, I guess. It wasn't until I had an actual face-to-face encounter with the cartel, though, that things changed. My ex-girlfriend lives in Mexico, in a gated neighborhood on the wealthier side of the city. Naturally, I used to frequent her house when we were still together, and one night her parents left her and her little brother alone until the next day, so she invited me over and we got pretty hammered. Around 2 a.m. we went out for a walk because we wanted to smoke a bit, stuff from Texas, and we sat on the bleachers of a basketball court within our neighborhood. It was behind a very, very beautiful house with expensive cars parked outside, and I asked her, what do they do? To which she replied in Mexican, a slang for cartel. I thought that she was joking until she told me how the Mexican army had their whole neighborhood on lockdown because of them back in 2014. My smile faded quickly. I got kind of mad and worried, and I asked her what the heck are we doing behind a cartel safe house at like 2 a.m. smoking. This all happened quickly, and after 5 minutes of being there, a tall white pickup truck parked in front of the court. I immediately knew that this was not good news, and I kept telling her that we need to leave. She told me to calm down and that it was probably just some kids making out in the truck. That seemed reasonable enough to me, but I started panicking after the truck just stayed there for like 5 minutes without turning off the engine, and as soon as we got up to leave, it took off. As we made our way to the other street, the huge weight that was lifted from my shoulders fell right back twice as heavy when the truck intercepted us at the very corner of that street. She ran into a house that was still in construction. She tried to pull me in with her, but I didn't budge because something I've learned from my dad being a cop is that you never run if you have nothing to hide. She had weed on her and I didn't, so I just stood there for a bit until the window of the driver's side went down and a man signaled me to step closer, and so I did. As I walked up, the first thing that I saw was both of the men in there were armed, and this definitely made my stomach drop. The passenger looked completely out of his mind you, like he genuinely looked unhinged. His pupils were huge, and he was clearly on something. On the other hand, the driver looked pretty normal. I dare say he was really normal, in fact, and that much was comforting. He asked me, this whole conversation was in Spanish, of course, but he said, "What are we doing?" I said, "Smoking," and he asked, "Smoking what?" I just said normal cigarettes, and he turned to look at his partner and back at me, and there was a long pause before I said, "I don't know who you're looking for, but it's definitely not us. I mean, I'm not even from here." he asked me if I was American, to which I nodded, and then he said to show me. Fortunately, I always carry my passport with me since I cross the border so often. He asked me about my girlfriend, and I said that she was American too. She's not, though. And he told me to go and get her, and I told him that I would rather not, because if they found weed on her, well, that wasn't hers at least, she would be in a lot of trouble. Fortunately, the guy didn't insist, and after going through my phone, he told me that he didn't want to see us out this late behind that house ever again. They then took off, and I turned back to her, who was peeking from behind a pile of cement bags. I signaled her that we were leaving, and we quickly ran back to her house. When we got to her front yard, I asked her to give me the weed so that I could get rid of it, and she told me that she hid it under the floorboards of that house, so we ran back to get it because if they found it there, we would be in a lot of trouble. The 2 minutes that it took for us to run back to her house, that was easily the scariest moments that I've ever experienced. What still makes my stomach turn to date, though, is the look the other guy had on his face. I'm telling you that he looked absolutely unhinged. He didn't say a single thing, but he was staring me down the whole time with his hand around the grip of the rifle. Honestly, I felt like he was just itching for me to say the wrong thing, so that he could officially blow my brains right out then and there. Shortly after moving into our home, we started experiencing paranormal activities, I guess you could call it. Our house is not old by any means. It was built in 2010, so it has very little history. Most of the things that happened would happen at night, though. Things like voices and really hard slams against the walls. I'm not talking about the house settling. I mean, it would sound like a football player hit the walls at full force. On 2 separate occasions, we came out of our room in the morning and all of the pictures on the walls were now on the ground. Mind you, these are 4 pictures on different walls. Both my mother and friend spent the night on our couch once and said that someone was walking around the house all night waking them up, and they honestly thought that it was me. But I was in my own room all night, and I have prosthetic legs, so it definitely wasn't me sleepwalking. Lights turn off and on for no reason, and lastly, the one that bothered me the most. My son was 5 years old and would often talk to an imaginary friend that he called the cowboy. These weren't one-sided conversations, mind you. I would listen in while he was in his room, and he would pause to reply. There were normal breaks that you would have as if they were going back and forth. I once asked my son where the cowboy came from, and he said he followed us from Arizona. My in-laws live in Phoenix. We live in California. We visit twice a year normally. I befriended my neighbor, who is an old lady that happens to write metaphysical books for a living. I helped her with some chores, mowing her lawn and stuff like that. And after finding this out, I jokingly told her about our situation, and she said that she would take care of it. Weirdly, too, we stopped having problems after that. My son said the cowboy came to him and allegedly told him goodbye. So 6 years ago, I was homeless. It was just me and my cat in the woods. I used to live in this wooded area that over the years had a lot of suicides via jumping off of cliffs that led to the ocean, and a lot of OD or murders of homeless people even in the past. It's all craggy cliffs with a thicket of trees and high bushes. A lot of people like to hike through there. Now, I know it sounds like a horror movie setup, and you're absolutely right, but I don't scare easy, and I wanted privacy for me and my cat. So one night I woke up at around 3 in the morning, from what I would guess about maybe 100 feet away. I heard this really beautiful singing. I woke up from it. I mean, it was very strange in how faint it was, but it woke me up instantly. Then out of nowhere, the singing stops. I'm in my tent with my knife drawn just to be sure, and it's 3 a.m. after all. Without hearing any footsteps, which would be impossible for my surroundings, I heard a woman's voice inches from my tent. She said, "Is he awake?" I vocally say, "What the heck?" and leap out of my tent with my knife. It took me about 5 seconds. I got out and there was no one there, not even a hint of anybody. I had my light on, wide awake, and there was nothing. Well, after a cigarette and standing out there for a few minutes, eventually I went back to bed. That was the only real spooky thing that has ever happened there. Some small things here and there, but never, ever before sunset, and anything like that. It can be hard for men to deal with hair loss, even though it is actually common. Luckily though, I'm here to provide you with a solution so you don't even have to talk about it. Through Hims, you can restore your hair by accessing their personalized hair loss solutions. Hims provides you with convenient and quality access to a range of hair loss treatments that work, all from the comfort of your own couch. Hims makes treating hair loss simple with doctor-trusted options and clinically proven ingredients like finasteride and minoxidil that can regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. Choose from personalized chewable, oral, spray, and serum treatments to find what works best for you. The process is simple and 100% online, so there are no uncomfortable doctor visits. Just answer a few questions and a medical provider will determine if treatment is right for you. If you're prescribed, your treatment is sent directly to you for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, and they can help you get your confidence back too with visibly thicker and fuller hair. I personally gave their Biotin Builder gummy supplements a try, and not only were the B vitamins, folic acid, and other nutrients that support the body seemingly assisting with healthier hair for me, but the wild cherry flavor was absolutely delicious. 10 out of 10 would recommend if you're looking for a good supplement for these things. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/scared. That's HIMS.com/scared for your personalized hair loss treatment options. hims.com/scared. Please keep in mind that results vary, based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. So this happened years ago, but I'm now recollecting bits and pieces from that event and am thankful to be sane and safe. I'm honestly just airing it out so I can get input or opinions, because really I just don't know what to make of it. I'll preface this by saying that this happened a while ago, back in 2019 when I was 16 years old, hence I was very naive and quite gullible. I'm aware that it might not be a human trafficking case, but it does seem suspicious regardless. So, for context, this happened in a relatively large North American city. It was late December, a few days before Christmas. I had just finished hanging out with my friends and was using public transit, the subway, to get back home. My friends lived in a different area, so I had to travel back alone in that direction. The subway wagons were mostly empty. It was already dark out. I recall it being around maybe 8 to 9 p.m. I was sitting on an individual seat where the setup was structured in a way that had another seat perpendicular to my current one, which was empty. This one guy, who looked to be relatively young, plopped down on the adjacent seat and greeted me with a smile instantly. I didn't think too much of it at the time since, in all honesty, I thought that he was pretty cute. Physically, he had a middle part, chestnut hair, was relatively tall and very slim, nice facial features too. I don't remember his face in a very detailed manner, but I remember thinking that he was really cute. He was dressed in a sweater and jeans, didn't look disheveled or overly casual either. Upon sitting down, he greeted me smiling, presented himself and shared his name. We then started making small talk, and he brought up the fact that he had finished university, which made me ask for his age. He claimed to be 24, which seemed to match with his appearance. What really creeps me out, though, is his response. I told him that I was 16 years old, and he didn't even seem slightly fazed by that. Matter of fact, he was smirking and had formed a small visible grin, talking about how he missed being this young and advising me to stay in school. He proceeded with asking me about what I was doing alone in the metro, my plans before that, and if I had any plans coming up in the next few hours, to which I stupidly answered no. He then started expressing how his friends had come up with this supposed dare where he had to bring a random girl over, a complete stranger, to their party or hangout by accosting them randomly, such as this very occasion. I remember at the time finding it hard to believe, so I insisted on going home about a handful of times, to which he started pleading with me, claiming that it would be fun and if I were to be uncomfortable, it would bring me right back to the subway station. I kept insisting that my mum would get mad, and I asked him if there was another day where we could do that, but he answered that it was a one-time thing, that it's a very uncommon gathering, that he hasn't seen these friends in a long time, and wouldn't see them after the event most probably, because of a full schedule and all that. He also kept pushing the fact that he wouldn't keep me up for long, and so I eventually gave in. I know, super stupid. I still can't believe it to this day, in fact. Well, we had gone through a few subway stations and got off in a pretty desolate area, which was known for its drug use, prostitution, and poverty. But to be frank, I didn't know that at the time, although it was pretty obvious looking back. That specific neighborhood still has a pretty tarnished reputation to this day, mind you. But anyway, the guy, his name was Ben, then revealed his real name to be different than the one that he initially had given me, and was seemingly Slavic. The name that he revealed, though, is most likely also fake, to be honest, but he then started asking me pretty intrusive questions, such as, what are your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? What's stressing you out right now? Why did you decide to come along? He claimed to like getting to know people beyond the surface level, hence why he was being so intrusive. I was a straight A student at the time, so I simply told him that studies were my main concern as of now, to which he answered that there had to be more than that. We had been about 15 minutes in at this point when a car slowed down next to us and rolled its windows down. A man let out a "hey," but was immediately shooed away by Ben. Ben then told me that the man was supposedly John, which I didn't know who that was, but apparently he was the driver and essentially a client in some sort of sense. I was definitely starting to get wary about this, but still made it to the hangout a few minutes later, which was located in a regular townhouse. It wasn't like worn down or anything is what I'm getting at. I was greeted by maybe 5 to 6 dudes who were seemingly over 25. 2 of them looked above 30 as well. They all stared me down and immediately asked how old I was. I told them that I was 16. One of the guys seemed sort of phased and let out a, "Come on man, that's my sister's age. They might even be in the same high school." They all kind of laughed it off and moved on. They never spoke about it again and barely asked me any questions, except for, "How did you guys meet?" Also, it was obvious that someone's dad owned that place, as there was an old man dozing off on the couch. We were all gathered around a dinner table. The host served me some food along with the other guests, but I refused to eat as I was honestly starting to feel a bit queasy about the situation. After everyone, except me, finished eating, we all went upstairs. Ben started playing the guitar and another man joined in by playing some keys on the piano. They then asked me to film them using Ben's phone, so I did. And when this was going on, this was when I honestly started getting really terrible vibes and felt the need to leave immediately. So I put the phone down and slowly made my way through the frame of the door. One of the older guys was standing near it, and asked me what was up and if I was enjoying their company. We started talking for a minute, and he claimed to be an accountant. He then started leaning in and tried to slightly hover over me against the door frame. However, I stepped back into the staircase and made it to the front door, opened it, and went out to the driveway. Luckily, the door wasn't locked. Ben followed and asked me if I wanted to leave. I immediately said yes, and this time he didn't insist on bringing me back in. I should also add that right before leaving, I had told Ben that my mum was relentlessly calling me and was worried, to which he obliged. On our way back, he proceeded to ask me if I was genuinely 16 and not below that. He told me that if he were my dad, he would never let me out of my sight again, because what I just did, which was going to the party in the first place, was the dumbest thing that he had ever seen any girl do, especially since I had no reason to do that, according to him. Once he accompanied me back to the subway station, I asked for his Snapchat. I was a complete moron, I know, or any type of social media that he had, and he told me that he doesn't use a phone like that and was apparently fully off-grid. I went back home, and after that I never heard from him again. Now, although I didn't get harassed or violence or there were any sexual endeavors or anything like that, and it's a pretty outdated happening, I'm genuinely scared that I could have potentially been trafficked or something. I want to know if there's any way that I could leave an anonymous tip to the city or something as well. I was searching through public records, but I couldn't find anything. But what do you guys think about all of this? Also, I should probably mention that I was the only girl there. Like I mentioned earlier, Ben had said previously that apparently all the guys were bringing girls to this place, but I can assure you that there were no other girls anywhere in sight. I thought that I would share my story about my grand's house. I'm aware of 4 events that happened in that house, and I'll caveat by saying that I'm probably best described as a curious skeptic. Paranormal stuff, it definitely fascinates me, but I am by no means claiming that there isn't a rational explanation. So, I'll get the first incident out of the way. It probably happened first to my knowledge anyway. My granddad died roughly 10 months before I was born. My cousin is the youngest in the family to have met him, and she claims that when she was staying at my grand's house one night after he had died, she woke up and he was allegedly standing at the end of the bed watching her. I say, get it out of the way, because that's literally all I know, and frankly my cousin is terrible and she lies, so who knows. But the remaining events occurred in a different room to the one my cousin claims to have had an experience in. This room was the smallest bedroom, and I hated this room. For as long as I can recall, I hated how it made me feel, and I used to always say that it was haunted, even before I had any experiences that I couldn't quite explain. One of the weird feelings came from behind the door where there was a narrow recess in the wall. It was maybe 15 inches across, and my gran used it to store loose odds and ends, like rolls of wrapping paper and such. But for some reason, I always felt like something was watching me out of that little gap in the wall. One time, I was probably 5 years old. I was staying the night at my gran's place and had to sleep in that room. Despite every effort to make the room friendly by putting up Barney wallpaper, for non-UK or perhaps younger UK readers, this was not Barney the dinosaur, but a cartoon from the late 80s, early 90s, about an old English sheepdog. But I still hated that room. I got told that it was time for bed, and so I made my way up the stairs. At the top, the stairs turned to the right into a short landing, and I had to come back on myself to get to the room at the end, but as I turned, I froze. On the white wooden door in front of me, I could see a face with horns looking back at me. The only way that I can describe it, though, was that it was almost like seeing it in my mind's eye rather than a physical mark, but I would swear to you that it was right in front of me, looking at me from the door. Now, it could have well been a product of a child's vivid imagination, but it sufficiently freaked me out enough to make me cry with fear and panic. I quickly ran back downstairs to get an adult and said that there was a face on the door. When I was brought back upstairs, though, it was gone. The third incident happened when I was about 13. My gran was the only one in the family who had Sky TV, so I would regularly go and visit so that I could watch wrestling on TV. On this particular day, I was downstairs watching and my gran was upstairs. Usually she was just sewing when she was upstairs. She had one of those old Singer sewing machines, a big cast iron unit with a solid wooden frame. My gran was like 4'9" as well, a tiny woman, with her healthiest years definitely behind her. But anyway, I was downstairs watching The Rock do his thing and I heard a terrific bang from upstairs. I rushed upstairs to check my gran was okay when I saw her come out of her bedroom, and the sewing machine, which easily weighed upwards of 30 pounds, was on the floor having tipped itself over. She and I both had no idea how that had happened. Now lastly, some years later, I was speaking to my aunt and she had spent a lot of her childhood in the 60s and 70s growing up in that house. She said that that room had been her bedroom, and she told me that she also hated this room and thought it to be haunted, and that she had had an experience of her own in there. You see, the bedroom sat at the front side of the house and had one window, which was directly above the front door, and she recalled that one day she was out in the street playing with her friends while her siblings and parents were at work. She is the youngest of 4, and something made her look up at the house, and in the window, she could see the figure of a man standing looking out onto the street, despite knowing for sure that there was nobody home. So, that's the story of my gran's house. Unfortunately, we have no ties to the house anymore as she moved out in around 2010 and she died in 2012. But I still regularly think about that house and the weird feeling I got in that bedroom throughout my childhood, and only ever in that bedroom. Not the rest of the house, only there. So, if you've managed to stumble through all of my rough memories here, then thank you, and I would be interested to know your thoughts about any of this. So this happened in the basement of my childhood home when I was around 13 to 14 years old. The house didn't feel particularly haunted or anything, but both of my 2 siblings can attest that weird stuff used to happen down in that basement. I was having a sleepover with a friend one day, and whenever we stayed at my house, we always slept down there. The basement was fully finished with a big TV, couch, pool table, Murphy bed, the works, so it was great because us rowdy teenagers could hang out down there and not disturb my parents as much. Anyway, we fell asleep watching a movie on a DVD or something, and at some point I recall waking up to the bright yellow selection screen glaring in the dark, and the same annoying sound clip replaying over and over at just a few decibels too loud. Now, it's important to note that to the left of the TV was a tall, skinny closet with a door. I remember that we had gone into the closet to grab some extra blankets before starting the movie and all that. And perhaps we didn't close it all the way after because when I woke up, the door was slightly ajar, maybe 3 to 4 inches. So I wake up and I'm in that weird, surreal state where I can't really tell if I'm awake yet or still asleep and just dreaming, but I look at the TV and am suddenly frozen with fear. Right in front of the TV on the left-hand side was this tall, skinny black shadow obstructing the bright yellow color of the screen. It didn't have any particular features, more just a dark, vaguely shaped mist of a standing figure. Suddenly, though, almost as if the shadow noticed me looking at it, The mist quickly drifts into the closet next to the TV, and I swear that the door closes shut behind it. At this point, I'm so scared that I couldn't even move. I wanted to wake up my friend really badly, but I couldn't even bring myself to speak. I just sat there hoping that I was just seeing things and or trying to convince myself that I was still asleep and it was in fact just a dream. All of a sudden though, my friend, who I thought was asleep this entire time, sits straight up next to me on the couch and goes, "Hey, did you just see that?" We sprinted up those stairs so fast our feet barely touched the ground. Really, I don't think that I've ever run like that in my entire life, that scared. We told my parents the next morning and they just sort of laughed at us, clearly not believing it. And when I told my siblings the same story, they both just sort of shrugged, each responding similarly with someone along the lines of, "Yeah, well, weird stuff happens down in that basement all the time." When I was around 11 to 13 years old, I experienced something that, to this day, I really have no answers for. So I woke up for school one morning and walked across the passageway to the bathroom. I stood in front of the sink in the mirror to brush my teeth, and as I looked into the mirror, I just suddenly blacked out. Not in the physical sense, but my body was frozen as if in fear, and I saw a scene that went like this. I was seeing a POV of myself floating in space, surrounded by stars and dark space. Directly in front of me, but quite far away, I saw a house floating in space. It was a stereotypical house, I guess. A red wooden door right in the middle with a window on each side, green bushes at the front, and I was floating closer to the house, almost like zooming in on it. I got closer and closer, and when I got right up to the door, it opened, and I saw this face of a woman with black hair. She was old, and her face made me feel with fear, like I've never felt before. As soon as I saw her face, she screamed, and I woke up. I was looking at myself in the bathroom mirror again. I was still frozen in fear, similar to the feeling of waking up from a nightmare and not being able to move or scream. But maybe that's not a universal experience, it's just the best way that I can say it. Anyway, I think it must have lasted a few seconds, maybe a minute, but man, it felt like forever. It took me a moment to compose myself and try to get ready for school. The following morning, when I woke up, it happened again. This carried on for a few weeks, if memory serves me correctly. It became intermittent, with days in between that were normal. Every time, though, it was the same thing. Space, the house, the door, the screaming old woman. People I've told this story to have always asked me what she looked like, if I knew her, but I didn't. Her face was hard to describe as well. The best comparison I can make is to the uncanny, almost like an AI-generated face that was randomized and just looks kind of off, I guess. Something almost human that should be human, but was something about it that just isn't. That feeling took over my whole body too. The fear was almost unbearable. It was almost like losing consciousness, having a vision, and I don't exactly know. I mean, my body didn't fall to the floor, I just sort of froze and my eyes stayed open, but what I saw around me was not my bathroom. I told my parents about it, and they didn't know what to think, and I doubt that I could describe it as well as I can now. They told me to wait to see if it happens again. They chalked it up to something like being half asleep and still daydreaming. For a few days it didn't happen as well, and I thought that it had finally stopped. Then, one Sunday afternoon, I was in the living room with my dad. He was watching a soccer game. I was at the desk area behind the couch packing some things away, and it happened again, the same as it always did. The fear, the freezing, the space, the house, and the woman. When I came around, I just cried. I went over to my dad, who noticed something was wrong. I told him that it happened again. and it was now happening during the day while I was very awake and around my family. AKA, I should feel safe, which in my mind rules out anything about me being in a sleep-wake state or still dreaming. They eventually took me to a doctor who listened to my story and also didn't really have any answers. He told me to wait it out, and after seeing my doctor, it didn't really happen for a long time. I thought that really explaining it to someone must have released whatever hold it had on me. But about a year or two later, we relocated overseas for my dad's job. I was 14, and the last time it happened was the first morning moving into our new house. Since that day, it hasn't happened again. I'm now 27, and I still have no answers as to what the heck this was. So, if anyone here has any answers for me, or has had a similar experience, or maybe can refer me to a space community where I can find answers about this, then please do let me know. I want to preface this by saying that while I don't live in the safest neighborhood, I've lived here all my life without feeling unsafe. Neighborhoods like mine, which are impoverished and predominantly minority, are often labeled as dangerous, but they foster a strong sense of community among residents. And one night, I was walking home after leaving my apartment to buy something at a nearby store. I live in a city that really never sleeps, and it was only around 10 or 11 p.m., so it was just a regular early night for me to the deli to get some snacks. There was nothing eerie or weird or dangerous about it. As I entered my apartment building, a man hurried to catch the door before it closed behind me, though. It's common for people, including myself, to forget their keys or need to use the intercom to enter, so I held the door for him despite not recognizing him and sensing that he was intoxicated. My building had two sides, and I assumed that he lived on the other side since he wasn't a familiar face or anything. Like I said, I've lived here most of my life and I know most of my neighbors. Anyway, as I walked into the lobby, there was another boy waiting for the elevator. Thinking back, I don't believe that I recognized him either. When the elevator arrived, the boy and I walked in, and at the last minute, the man grabbed the door to join us as it was closing. It was then that I noticed that the man had been lingering off to the side of the lobby, waiting for the elevator too. I began to feel uneasy. The man had entered at the last moment. He was able to see the elevator floor button that I pressed. His finger hovered over the button of the floor that I had just pressed as if he was also going to press that one, until he noticed that it was already pressed. I immediately felt my stomach drop as I definitely knew that he was not someone who lived on my floor. Thankfully, the other boy in the elevator was going to a floor higher than mine. When we reached my floor, the man exited the elevator and held the door open, expecting me to exit after him. I hesitated, slightly staring at him without moving. Something inside of me urged me to stay in the elevator. Once he realized that I wasn't getting out, he let the door shut, and I immediately heard his footsteps going straight down the stairs to exit the building. I stared at the boy, wondering if I should say something, worried that he would think that I was weird for just staying on the elevator, even though we passed my floor. But in the end, I didn't say anything. We reached his floor, and he silently got off, and I took the elevator back down to my floor. I went into my apartment, and I locked all my doors. What scares me most about this, though, is that my parents were out of the country, so if that creepy man would have forced his way into my apartment, I definitely would have been completely alone. I don't know if he was really after me or if I had made the whole thing up in my head, but I have never had a feeling of intuition or uneasiness like that before. Looking back, I honestly wonder if that boy was a guardian angel. This story needs a lot of context and by any means is not meant to scare or to shock, and I'm not trying to gain anything from this. I am genuinely scared and I could really use some advice. I don't know if anyone will share this, but if you find something familiar or recognize any of the entities, then please let me know. So the story starts when I was about 7 years old. I'm now 25. My dad was a taxi driver and, let's say, allegedly a loan shark. We were living with my grandparents, and my dad was fed up with my mum and my grandpa always getting into arguments and decided that we needed to leave. The prices for apartments and houses in Eastern Europe at that time were unaffordable for their income. My dad a cab driver and my mum unemployed at the time, but somehow because of my dad's alleged loan business, he managed to get his hands on an apartment, and that's pretty crucial to my story. That apartment was on a communist block, apartment 1, on a building numbered 6. I won't disclose the name of the road for now, but the whole thing was sketchy, even from my point of view at that time. Apparently, I found out years later that the apartment was lost by a gambler, and because of the circumstances he was in, he had to sell it to pay debt to an alleged loan shark. You understand how that goes, but when we moved there, a series of strange things started happening, and something even today gets my mind running back there, and I just feel like there's something that wants me to go back there or around that place. So a week after we moved into that apartment, everything was normal. I was as happy as a kid may have been, and I had my own room as opposed to sleeping with my dad. It was a sunny Saturday around springtime, and my mum was in the kitchen, and I was playing in the living room just watching some TV. All of a sudden, though, I start hearing a woman crying her heart out and sobbing from the outside. I looked out the window, but I didn't see anybody. My mum came running into the room with a shocked face and asked if I was all right. I told her yes and asked who's crying this loud. And when we looked out the window again, as we were on the ground floor, we looked down and there was a woman standing below our window, caressing the wall and crying as loud as she could. My mum then shouted at her, "Lady, are you okay? What's happening?" But she didn't respond initially. After a while, my mum was considering calling the police, but when she asked her again if she was okay, she raised her head from the ground and told my mum, as she stopped crying, "You cannot understand. Nobody does. You will soon enough." Scared, my mum shut the window and went back inside and called my dad, who was at work, but after she told him what happened, the woman had gone away. Strangely, as we were on the ground floor, we had a pretty big line of sight outside, but we didn't see her get up or leave or anything. Anyway, she popped up a couple of times after that, and we just concluded that she was crazy, and my mum actually filed a police report at one stage. We thought that she might be somebody related to the gambler that lost the house or something, and maybe she's mad at us moving in there, but upon my dad asking, the gambler had no relatives or close friends for that matter. Well, she showed up about 6 times, with one-day pauses in between, since the first appearance. The last time she showed up to cry under our window, my mum was mad and went outside to argue with her. She wore a grey hoodie and had the hood on and a strange selection of clothes for a lady on the elder side, around maybe 50 to 60 years old. My mum told her to leave and to stop coming to cry here or she'll be in trouble with the police. She just looked blank at my mum and got up and then left. That was really the only time that we ever saw her getting up to leave, by the way. And after that, she stopped coming around and we never saw her again. The thing that was a mystery, though, at that time is that we spoke with some neighbors and nobody had heard of her. A couple who were living above us had their living room window above us, and they told us that they kind of saw somebody fitting our description but never heard her crying. Mind you, it was way too loud to not reach their window as they were on the first floor and the woman crying was as loud as she could. She never showed up again, and a police officer came after 2 weeks and told us that they have been patrolling around and found nobody fitting the description or other reports of crazy ladies crying under people's windows. So, really, it was as if we were the only ones seeing her. Anyway, this next one, I call this thing the fast entity because I have no idea what it is or how it looked, apart from what I was able to identify at that time. Now, whenever I was just hanging around playing or trying to sleep around the house and all that, sometimes when I was looking into the direction of the window, there was something that would move either up or sideways really, really fast. I could see that it was black, but it was so fast that I could only catch it in the corner of my eye every single time, like a big bird flying really close to the window at incredible speed. Honestly, I thought it was just my imagination, until I had a friend from school come over. I was excited that day to show him some new toys, and he all of a sudden just stopped and asked, "Wow, did you see how fast that went by the window?" And I remember how he was like, "Wow, that must have been a cool bird or something," as he wasn't really the smartest tool in the shed, but he was funny. I had an eerie feeling on the other hand. It didn't look like a cool fast bird to me, but rather like something trying to get a glimpse of what I was doing on the constant. The best that I can describe it is like 3 or 4 basketballs merged together with a cape over them, moving at Formula 1 speeds past my window every now and then. I actually told my mum and dad about this, but they are really skeptical, and at that age they probably thought that it was only my imagination. One early morning, as my dad used to start his shift at around 5 o'clock, he went to start his car, and it was really cold that morning. He had an old diesel beat-up Fiat. He usually let the engine run for a couple of minutes before driving away. As he was sitting by his car sipping his coffee, he saw an elderly woman kneeling and leaving something at every door. The entrance of the apartment building had a big see-through door. She was wearing a black dress and had a scarf over her head, and as he turned away to open the car door, she just completely vanished. Luckily though, another neighbor just got out of the building at that time. My dad started chatting with him and asked him if he saw this woman inside, and he told my dad, "Oh, it must have been the cleaning lady. She usually mops the building, but she comes at around 9 or 10. It's a bit early for her to be here right now." My dad went briefly into the entrance hall of the building, and all he could find was dust thrown at every doorstep. Strange, as it was snowing outside and the ground was soaked in snow and mud. He just left for work in the end, and really he tried to forget it. Now, my mum just got a job at this point, and at this time for me to spend some time alone, I would get home from school and I would just be, well, alone. But I had a cousin older than me, and she usually came as I finished school to stay with me until my mum got home from work. I was in the 1st grade and she was in the 9th grade at that time. I finished school at around 12 and she usually finished her class at around 1 o'clock, so there was almost an hour that I had to spend alone at home every day. My mum always finished at around 5. Now, she had a boyfriend which I really adored at the time. He was a really cool guy I looked up to, and he was into dirt bikes, bikes in general, and all the cool stuff that a 1st grader might find really interesting. My cousin usually came together with him, and they'll play with me until my mum would get home. He was always really dressed nicely and bringing all sorts of cool magazines and playing cards, probably to impress my cousin, but the thing is that I really liked him. Now one day I got home from school and was patiently waiting for my cousin to arrive. I suddenly hear a knock on the door and I thought, wow, it's pretty early for my cousin to finish school. I went to the door and looked through the door visor and saw my cousin's boyfriend standing there with a straight posture, waiting, also looking strangely pale. In excitement, I went to get the keys to open the door to let him in. As I went to get the keys, though, I saw my cousin out of the window coming into the entrance of the apartment building. Our apartment was really close to the entrance, as it was the first one. She got home early from school that day and she came straight to me. When I opened the door, my cousin was there and I let her in, and at a glance I saw her boyfriend in the hallway in the same straight position, looking pale and waiting outside. As she closed the door, I asked her, "Isn't your boyfriend coming in?" She replied, looking confused, he isn't coming today. He has a lot of homework to do. And I thought, okay, he only walked her here, and then he must have gone away. But he was there before her, which was really strange. What would have happened too if she didn't finish school early that day? Would I have let whoever that was, or whatever that was, inside, thinking that it was my cousin's cool boyfriend? Because after some discussion with her, I confirmed that he was never there that day. But even now I know what I saw, and he was. Or at least something was. There have been a series of other strange things that have happened there too. We only lived there for like a year and a half, but there have been countless strange instances that will take a lot of detail to explain. But maybe I'll make a part 2 at some stage and I'll share with you guys. Like, from perfectly working water pipes bursting to random scratching sounds, there was a lot of them too. We all had restless feelings just being in that apartment. My father used to work like 14 to 16 hours a day to be able to provide for us, as my mum didn't earn a whole lot. But he would arrive home tired and feeling like he was going to fall asleep behind the wheel. And once he came home and he just couldn't get any rest, even feeling that tired, because he felt like something was off. My parents eventually sold the apartment because they raised some more money and got a good offer on another bigger apartment, 10 k's away from the city. Now, why am I reminiscing about all of this, and why am I concerned and sharing all of this? Well, I had a nightmare the past few days that seems to be repeating, where I wake up on my desk that I used to have in that apartment, and when I look around, I'm in a cemetery with a computer in front of me. Strange, I know, but the feeling that I constantly have is that I have to go there, I have to see something. I don't know what. Not in the apartment, because I don't know who lives there now, and honestly I don't want to be a crazy person knocking on their door like, hello, I used to live here and all that. But the thing is that the town that we live in is relatively small, and I have friends all over and used to drive part-time for my dad's new business for a while when I used to be in college. I always get close to that street, but even though it's convenient to drive on that road to get to another part of the city, I, for some reason, just never do. There's always something keeping me from going there. Not that I don't want to, but there's always something just keeping me from it. Like a car parked the wrong way, somebody backing up looking for parking and blocking the street and all that, and I would always have to go around them. I've never had friends living on that road, never really had a reason to go there after we left, even though it's kind of a popular area of the city where you can go if you just drive around. I had a work colleague who lived pretty close but a couple of buildings away from that road. We had a little house party at his place, and he asked who wants to come with him to the store to get something, and I volunteered, and as soon as I got up, I had a sort of striking headache, which I thought was because of the alcohol, and I decided that I was too drunk to go in the end. But later on, I realized that if I would have went, we would have gone on the road that I used to live on to get to the store. So is something stopping me from going back there? I have this feeling that I should go by that place, but I just find it hard to explain to others. A sort of feeling that in order to fix what I'm feeling and the answers to some of my problems that I'm experiencing are there, and I should just go on a walk around that building on that road. My question is, though, am I being deceived? Could something want me to go there that isn't good or good-intentioned? Or is it the opposite, and I have to solve this now that I can? And if I decide to go to those measures, can I protect myself should any of this be real and try to hurt me? I am pretty skeptical when it comes to these things, but the feeling is so strong that I'm starting to question my sanity. I don't know. Maybe it's better to be safe than sorry. If anybody hears this and wants more details or specifics, I would be happy to share more in the second part that I might write up at some stage. In any case, I appreciate you hearing me out and any advice that you may be able to give. So my best friend Jordan, female and same age as me, and I were FaceTiming on a casual summer afternoon. We often would do our own thing while on call, just for company's sake. For illustration, I mean that she had a vanity in her bedroom where she would keep her iPad propped up that gave a view of the chair that she sat on when using the vanity, and the blank wall that it faced. On the other side of the vanity was a wall that was shared with her closet. She was organizing her clothes, and I was just minding my own business, playing with my dog while my iPad sat propped up on the kitchen table. Occasionally, I would glance over at the iPad, but it was always in my peripheral view, basically. Now, at some point, I noticed the chair was no longer kissing the vanity, but was pulled back an inch or two. Didn't think anything of it, so I continued minding my own business. A couple of minutes passed, and I looked over and saw that it was noticeably further away from the vanity, about a foot away now. I thought, that's strange, but maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Another minute passed, and when I looked back over, the chair was a solid few feet from the vanity now, and at this point, I knew something weird was going on. Was she playing tricks on me? Was I not noticing her coming into the camera view? I thought that I would have noticed in my peripheral vision. I could also see her moving things in the closet the whole time, but I don't know, maybe I was wrong. At this point, I said something along the lines of, Jordan, why has your chair moved so much? She then walks out of the closet to where I can see her and looks visibly distressed. She's never been the type to play pranks or lie or anything. We are best friends to this day, and she is virtually incapable of lying. So, I believe that she didn't do it. For context, I could see the entire chair at this point, the floor around it, and everything as well, so I could see that nobody was moving the chair. She was also home alone at this stage. Then, all of a sudden, the chair literally flies backwards into the wall. We both screamed bloody murder. I have never had such a visceral reaction to something in my life, in fact. We didn't know what to do or say for a minute. We just sat in deafening silence. She moved the chair back to its proper place, and we decided to carry on and try to ignore what had just happened, probably out of fear to acknowledge it. She then tells me that she needs to grab some trash bags from downstairs and that she'd be right back. Now, this is where things get pretty intense and pretty unbelievable, I know that. It's so out of this world, in fact, that I truly cannot comprehend to this day how or what actually happened, but I went back to playing with my dog when I got a sudden urge to look at the camera, and I swear that a rope, think noose-like, drops and hangs from what I assume is the ceiling, but I couldn't see it as it was out of camera view. I instantly hang up the call and start bawling my eyes out. Honestly, it felt demonic. I got a call back from her a few minutes later, still in tears. She looked concerned and asked what had happened. I said to her, "Do you own a rope?" And she said no. I said, "Did you drop a rope in front of the camera?" And she said no. I then explained what happened, and she didn't believe me at first, but the measure of my distress indicated to her that I was definitely telling the truth. Now, I admit that she very well could have been the culprit, but this was 11 years ago, and she would not be capable of holding onto a lie for this long, I think. But we still talk about that day a lot, in fact. I know how insane this sounds. I know this feels like a scene from The Conjuring and couldn't possibly be real, but I swear to you, on my dead brother's grave, that this event is real. I struggle to tell people about it because I know just how insane I sound when I say it. I've had many other paranormal interactions, but nothing ever like this. So, if you have any thoughts as to what this could have been, other than maybe she was a mastermind prankster, then I would love to hear it. I know for a fact that the chair wasn't her because, I could see with clear visibility that it wasn't. That much is clear to me. This happened about 4 years ago. I was dating a man who was an extreme skeptic when I've always been a 100% believer, even with only one personal paranormal experience before, which is a cool story, but for another time. He and I had been dating for about 3 years at this point, and I've always had a rule about no pranking, scaring, or tricking my partner, and I've always been completely honest with him, and he had the same values with me. Despite him being a non-believer, to this day he has always said that what he experienced in this story was completely unfabricated, and to his dissatisfaction, he still has no explanation for this event, even though he had mulled over it far too many times in all these past years. And this, even after he had ended things between us. He still maintains his skeptic status, but if you ask him to logically explain this incident without paranormal activity of some kind involved, all he says is, "I don't know." So, let me tell you what actually happened. Also, if anyone has had a similar experience or can offer any insight into this, I would love to hear it. So, one afternoon I was getting ready to go out on a date with said boyfriend. I like to do heavy makeup looks for fun when I go out, so per usual I was standing at my mirror on the dresser, creating some eyeshadow look, which notoriously took a bit of time. My boyfriend decided to go outside while I did this. He wanted to clean up the back porch a bit. So about 15 minutes into me doing my makeup while listening to some songs, played Outlook on my Google Home, but not singing out loud because I didn't want to mess up my makeup, my boyfriend comes barreling in the front door and rushes to where I'm at in my room. He is completely out of breath, looking at me expectantly with tears in his eyes, as if I'm supposed to know what it is that had him in this state. Which, for context, he was the least emotional person that I'd ever dated. I had only seen him cry about 5 times in our whole 4-year relationship. So, obviously, I'm really confused. As if to try and make any sense to me, he yells, "What's wrong?" Still looking frantic and out of breath, I, of course, just say, "What?" And he repeats himself again, just looking at me. I asked him what had him acting so uncharacteristically freaked out, but he's acting like I should obviously know. Confusion between us continues until I finally get him to explain what he's trying to ask me. His version of the events in those few moments when he went outside was this. He says that he went to the yard and was moving fallen limbs and things into a pile as I get ready inside. A couple of minutes go by until he's interrupted by me, apparently standing at our sliding glass door that overlooks that part of the yard that he's in. He said that I looked extremely distressed though, could see my face very clearly, and that I looked scared. He then heard me bang on the door to get his attention, as if something was urgent, and then heard my voice yell from inside, "Get in the house, I need you now, come here now." Obviously, he doesn't hesitate, figuring that something was very wrong, or that I might be in danger somehow, which is when I see him coming inside. Honestly, I thought that he was pranking me at first because, I haven't moved from where I was at, and the curtain on the sliding glass door was covered still, but like I mentioned before, it was not in our nature to joke like that. He thinks the same thing of me when I said that I've been standing in front of my dresser the entire time. I had him repeat these events, and he did so sounding just as freaked out as he initially did. He said that he saw, very clearly, me, full body, and distinctly heard my voice, which he said he could never mistake my voice for anybody else, like a neighbor. He said that he watched my mouth yell these words to him, and I looked like I was the one who was really freaked out. There was nothing there when he looked for me in the living room next to the said door, and found me in my room holding up a makeup palette on one hand and the brush in the other. I wasn't even singing along to the music that I had playing, so it's not like he heard my singing and mistook it for whatever just happened. Nothing like that had ever happened between us since then, too. Fast forward a few years to my next boyfriend, though. I still lived in the same house and had told him this story when we were first getting to know each other, as I've always thought that it was interesting. He was a mild believer in paranormal activity, but didn't have any stories of his own. A few months until us dating after, he started coming into my house often, and he had his own experience too. You see, he went out to his car at night and had sat down in it. He'd been out there for a few moments while I was inside watching TV in bed. He comes in a couple of minutes later looking confused and asks me if I had stepped outside or had called for him, which obviously I didn't. Then he tells me that it's weird that I didn't because he distinctly heard my voice, almost in his ear while he was in the car smoking. He said that he heard me say as clear as anything, "What is that?" in an upset tone. When he turned around expecting to see me, there was nothing. He thought about what had just happened for a few seconds before getting out of the car and coming directly inside to see if it somehow was really me. And I can confirm that it definitely wasn't. I've never had any personal experience like this, or any paranormal experience in that house at all. I no longer live there, however, but I thought that this was worth sharing as it's always just bothered me a bit, and sits in the back of my mind a fair bit. So, does anyone else have any kind of experience with this sort of stuff themselves? And if you have, what was it and what did you do about it? A few weeks ago, my partner and I decided to go for a late drive to this really pretty walking trail on a mountain about 2 hours away from my house. I've only been there a handful of times, but it's somewhere my partner and his family would visit often. We left home at midnight, which is a lot later than we normally would, so it was like 2:30 in the morning when we actually got to the trail. I had a weird feeling as soon as I got out of the car though, but I get that every time I'm in a bushy area, so I brushed it off. This walking trail, it twists you through the bush on a dirt path, down a bunch of stairs to a cave with glowworms, and over a waterfall that eventually loops back around at the end. I stopped at a sign just before you walk into the bush to light a J, and I heard what sounded like somebody walking in the bush off the trail. Again, I just brushed it off as being a big lizard or something. However, that eerie feeling was more intense now for sure. Every few steps down the trail, I was turning around to look behind me. It sounded like somebody was walking behind us in boots. Anyway, we get to a point in the trail where you can start to see the waterfall, and you have to start walking down the stairs. They also kind of bend a little bit as you go around the corner. My partner stops in front of me, and as I'm turning around to check behind me, I hear a female voice say "stop," clear as day in my ear. It was not really a threatening voice, but it sent a cold shiver through my whole body, and I immediately knew that something did not want us there. Before I could say anything, my partner turns around and says, "We should leave." I agree, and we basically run out of this trail, both of us now checking behind us. As we exited the trail, still running, my partner turns to check behind us one more time and stumbles into me, nearly tripping both of us over in the process. We have never pulled out of there so quick, and when we finally felt safe further down the mountain, I told my partner what I had heard and asked him if he had heard it too, and that's why he wanted to leave. He said that he didn't hear the voice, but he could tell from the sound of the waterfall that the river below it was really high up and it was probably blocking our path. He did say though that as he was leaving he heard some weird clicking noises and that's why he fell into me. I also heard those noises, but at that point I didn't want to look behind me and I just wanted to get the heck out of there. After talking to my partner more about it, he told me that a few people have died in that river from jumping off the waterfall, and oddly enough, when I heard the first noise, I was reading a sign warning people not to jump from the waterfall to the river, and that there was a fine if you were caught swimming in the river as well. And so, yeah, that's my story, and it was a really weird experience, and we haven't been back to that mountain since then. This first strange event happened when I was alone in our computer room, playing some old first-person shooter with my buddies, when I got a whole body chill and noticed my hair stand up on my arms and legs. It didn't really bother me too much until the laundry basket that was on the floor next to me just sort of tipped over by itself. Weird. Then I look at my right arm, which was on the same side of the laundry basket, and I noticed 3 scratch marks on my right arm. Not bloody, but very apparent. Those 3 scratch-like marks freaked me out. They almost looked like when you press down on sunburnt skin, but did not immediately disappear, and I didn't touch my arm at all. I remember telling my parents about it, as I was absolutely terrified. My mum believed me, but my dad was pretty skeptical. Fast forward about 5 hours into the night though, and my dad and mother are both woken up by the sound of our coffee machine cover getting flipped up and down repeatedly, which then ended up getting louder as it sounded like it had moved to the bottom of the stairs. My dad went downstairs to see what the commotion was about, but absolutely nothing seemed out of place. Our cat at the time was in their bed, as was our dog, so that wouldn't have made sense. This portion is from my parents' account, which to this day they still confirm what they experienced to be true. But I remember my dad telling me about this the next morning, and he seemed, well, scared, which I found odd as he was not religious or spiritual in any sense. Fast forward to literally the very next night though, and my mother and father are woken up by me in their room sleepwalking, which I have absolutely zero record of ever doing before these events, and afterwards too. My parents described my actions as though I were possessed by a woman, as I was clearly asleep but was trying to talk to them, but they couldn't understand me. They said that I was moving like a woman, flaunting hips, walking very feminine-like. Being smart, my parents did not interfere, but just sort of observed until I went back to my bed and proceeded to tell my parents to get my gun and to get away from me because something was wrong. This basically ended in my mother having the house cleansed multiple times, and nothing strange really ever happened again after this cleansing. We do live in an old farmhouse on a Native American burial area for context, so that might have something to do with it, but really, I just don't know enough about this stuff to say anything about it. This happened almost a year ago, on November. I used to live alone in my house, which itself is in an area where not many people live. Back then, I was pretty bored as I hadn't been talking to my friends that much and wanted to do something exciting. That's when I saw the opportunity. I used to be fascinated by the concept of Ouija boards. I wasn't a believer, but I still wanted to try and see what happens. I decided to do it at around 2 a.m. and I needed a Ouija board obviously, so I made one after searching for designs from the internet in the evening. It was made out of cardboard, and afterwards at night, I set up the board to get started. Initially, I was actually scared because it's really quiet here, especially at night. You can only ever really hear insects from outside, and that's pretty rare as well. But I lit up a candle, I don't know why, but I thought that it would be cool to do this, and closed all the curtains. It was just that one flame from the candle lighting up the whole room filled with silence. I moved the planchette and asked some questions, took inspiration from some experiences I read online, like, is someone here? Waited for a minute, and then asked 4 to 5 more similar questions to get more clearance, but it just wasn't moving. While this was all happening, I will admit that I was pretty scared because of the kind of atmosphere that the room had. But now comes the weird part. So, I was doing this sitting on the floor and facing a door, when I suddenly heard that door's metal L drop being banged once and a shadow kind of thingy from the light underneath the door, as if there was somebody else that moved across the door suddenly. I instantly jumped because it terrified me. My first instinct was to stop whatever I was doing. I blew the candle, and this was a huge mistake. The whole room suddenly went dark, and I forgot where my phone was. I got up to turn the lights on as soon as I could, And then something happened again. I'm not sure of this 100%, but I heard something like footsteps in the room. My own footsteps weren't loud enough to be heard because I was wearing socks, but it sounded to me as if somebody ran in my direction, even for just a second. And as soon as I turned the lights on, I found my phone and I got out of that room and I instantly went to my bedroom. I couldn't sleep after all of that happened, so I scrolled on my phone to try and calm myself down a bit, and then eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, the first thing that I did was I threw that board in the trash. 2 nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night and found myself standing in the outside corridor. Maybe I was half asleep and I walked outside by myself, but as soon as I realized this, I instantly went back in. After that too, every time that I would sleep, I would get this feeling as if something was watching me, and this happened for almost a week. I tend to get a bit teary-eyed when I think about this. It always happens when I talk about paranormal stuff now. But do you guys think that this all could have been because of the Ouija board, regardless of whatever it was made out of? Or do you think that this is something else? So a few months ago, I was home alone on my deck outside using my telescope when I heard a car door open and shut, followed by my dog barking and then my front door opening. I figured, oh, my mum is just stopping home. Sure enough, within 3 seconds, my name is being called and yelled repeatedly from inside, along with "Are you home?" or "Where are you?" which, in hindsight, is a bit strange because my mum knew that I was home. The dog is still barking by now, and I can hear my mum walking down the hallway, so I'm thinking, well, she'll just see me on the deck and stop yelling. She doesn't have to worry about it, and I don't have to go, so it's fine. But I never saw my mum, and I just heard her. It was around 25 seconds later of this yelling, moving about the house, and I'm getting a bit worried because I had told my mum before she left that I would be outside. Stupid me opens the back door to go inside, and the house is suddenly completely silent. No dog, no mum, and all the doors are locked. If this was a one-time thing, I would have attributed it to me being tired or stressed, but no. For the past few years, I've been very aware that something tends to be around me. Like, I'll have experiences all the time, except they're never really scary like this one. Before, I could coexist with it, like, whatever, you're cool, dude, I'm not bothered by you, but this time it just felt really, really different. I still tried to pay it no mind because I live in Appalachia, and if you've heard something, then no you didn't. But it still kind of freaked me out. Could this have been something different from whatever I was so used to coexisting with before? Like a different spirit thing, if it was that? Or was it the same thing, and now I'm just realizing how ominous all of this really is? I'm sharing this because, well, I need to get it out. I've lived quietly with these experiences for like 8 years now. I'm 25 and I've had time to unpack what I believe I compartmentalized during a rough period of my life. So, I moved into this complex when I was 17, almost 18. I often disagreed with my godmother, who I lived with at the time, and so my best friend Sarah suggested that I move in with her family in their 3-bedroom apartment. It was by no means spacious, but in my young mind it was leaps better than the homophobia I was living with currently. Sarah's unit was one of the bigger and nicer ones, and I was already familiar with the complex, as her mother was assistant to the complex manager. We often spent the night in empty apartments neighboring hers. The empty units were already spooky to me as a teen, but even then I chalked it up to just the eerie vibe of a room with no furnishings. Now, there were a few things that were strange. One of the apartments had a doorbell that would ring at random times of the day and night, despite the doorbell system for the complex being broken and eventually even disabled. But that certainly could be chalked up to faulty wiring, so whatever, right? The other empty unit was more transient. People moved in and out frequently, so we spent less time in that unit, although I do have many fond memories of sleepovers there. When we did stay in that unit, though, we were never able to get the family dog to come in. She would just stand in the doorway shaking. Although it was creepy, in my mind, she was just being a nervous dog, and I mean, labs can be weird like that. Anyway, when I moved in, I didn't realize how odd it was at first, not for at least maybe about 4 months. I was too caught up in the excitement of living with my best friend. I turned 18 and we spent most of our time out of the complex anyway, either at college or with friends. The time that I did spend at home, it was always lively, full of good food and smells and incense. I loved it. The first time I think I noticed something strange, I didn't really think too much of it at all. Banging came from the wall of the unit next to us, and I remembered complaining to Sarah that they were being awfully noisy. It was mid-afternoon though, and seeing as how it was new noises, I figured that someone had moved into the unit. The banging would continue through the weeks, but when it got too loud, Sarah and I would bang back and it would always quieten down. It would always stay quiet long enough to no longer be on the forefront of our minds, as we assumed that the neighbor got our message. I worked as a weekend and holiday receptionist at the time so that I could continue my schooling without stress. And for Thanksgiving, Sarah and her family chose to visit extended family. I was working, so I ended up staying home, and I had no apprehension about this whatsoever. In fact, I was sort of looking forward to it. I love alone time, as I am naturally a bit of an introverted person anyway. I have no issue being home alone, especially not when I had a dog and a cat to keep me company too. That day I went to work, came home, did my schoolwork, ordered pizza, and eventually I went to bed. When I woke up, it was to the cat yowling and hissing. I had left the lamp on in our room, but outside the window was pretty dark, so I knew it was still early morning. I didn't check what time it was, and honestly, as a dumb teenager, it didn't even occur to me to grab a weapon or assume somebody might have broken in. All I heard was the cat freaking out, and then I realized the dog too, low growling and snarling. I wasn't scared at first, just sort of confused. Then I rounded the hallway to face the living room, and suddenly the hair was raising on my arms. The cat was arched, yowling, staring at the dog. The dog had her ears back, fur raised, hunched as she growled at the corner of the living room. The way our unit was set up, the walls of the living room faced 2 areas, the empty hallway connecting all the apartments, and 2 windows that faced the balcony. I was sure that there was no one out there because I had left all the lights on and could see clearly out onto the porch. I told the dog to come and see, but she wouldn't even look at me. I asked her what was wrong and she barked. I tried to touch her, calm her down, but she just growled even louder at that. Honestly, it freaked me out, and being home alone as a young teenage woman, I did the stupid, maybe smart, I guess, decision to go back to bed and act like nothing had even happened. I left all the lights on after that, and the next morning, I felt comfortable enough to just laugh about it with Sarah on the phone. She agreed that it was strange, but we didn't have much else to say about it really. So, the unit across from us had 2 tenants move in during the time that I lived there. The first woman I didn't know. She would talk to Sarah's mother though, so through them I learned that she had been suffering horribly from sleep paralysis. It was an offhand comment she made one day, and honestly I didn't really think too much about it. Then the next tenant moved in. She had closer relations to Sarah and her younger sister. After a few months of living there, she quickly moved out though, experiencing boyfriend troubles. Not before mentioning to Sarah though that she had been experiencing sleep paralysis too, in the same back room, with a reoccurring nightmare she described as knowing something was behind the door but being frozen and unable to look. This is normal for sleep paralysis obviously, but the way that it was the same room and the way that the tenants had never known of each other, or talked even, it was very strange, and at this point I had lived in this complex long enough to start to feel a little bit uneasy, I guess. I was grateful that we only ever slept in the living room for all of those sleepovers, but the nail in the coffin to this particular unit happened about a month or so later. You see, Sarah and I were looking to move out. We wanted our own space, and we were debating on the unit across from us. At $800 in 2016, utilities paid, it was pretty much unbeatable. Sarah, though, more spiritual than I was, brought over a family friend who claimed to be sensitive one day to test the place out. Sarah never once mentioned the last tenant's accounts to her, and the woman, she made two very disturbing comments in that unit. She called the living room a vortex of depression, her words, upon entering. And in the back bedroom, where both tenants had stayed, she claimed that she was unable to look at the entity behind the door. Sharing this even now still gives me chills, because how did she know that? I am the first to call hoax or scam to spooky accounts. Science and the human brain can do weird things, but this was just downright chilling. In the end, we didn't move into that unit. Now finally, one hot summer day, I was home with Sarah's younger sister watching TV. There was a knock at the front door to the complex, so I went out into the hall to greet a man in an official uniform and badge. He introduced himself as a detective, asked if Sarah's mother was around. I said no and asked if I should take a message. He said that he was investigating a reopened cold case from the 80s where a woman had been strangled in a unit here. The unit, right next to ours, touching walls with our bedroom. Apparently, the killer had hopped the border to Canada, and now that he was back in the US, they were hoping to get him. I relayed the message later and then asked who lived in that unit now. The banging on the walls, it never stopped, and I could hear movement in that unit, I swear to it. But Sarah's mum insisted that there was no tenant. I had no way of knowing this at the time, but the articles that came out later revealed that a woman had been taken hostage in her apartment, hogtied with clothing, and then strangled. Her killer hopped the Canadian border and was caught killing another couple, which means that for over 10 months, I had been sleeping just mere meters from the echoes of a horrific murder scene. I hated that complex. I moved out about 3 months later with nothing much of note happening, but when I think back on it, I wonder about the area. The cold case of the strangled woman. The complex was right next to a bridge, which was so notorious for people jumping off that they installed a security fence 2 years after I moved out. The only time I ever lived in that area again, it was a rental house directly across the bridge. I had horrible night terrors there and moved out about 9 months later due to an abusive relationship. I've never felt any urge to go back to that complex, and when I spend too much time thinking about it, I always get a bit nauseous. Even halfway through sharing this, my hands are shaking. I've never experienced anything paranormal ever again, and honestly, I really don't want to either. I don't want to believe in ghosts, but whenever I go to proudly boast that, the memory of that complex literally haunts me and always makes me swallow my own words. This happened to me and my friend G when I was on my 3rd year of high school after the COVID pandemic and lockdown. Me and G live in the same city. It's really not that big. And we had this place that we enjoyed hanging out because there was no one around there. No drunk dudes, no annoying babies and crazy parents. Only a very few people and the calming sound of the grass. It's near the biggest park we have here, so the trail isn't that hidden. Anyway, we used to go there during the summer, but it was around November and it was kind of cold out and we were shaking a bit. But we just wanted to be alone, and I guess the creepy atmosphere was sort of intriguing. We had only one incident the last time that we went there, which I think I'll share here in the future at some point, but he was skipping about going there, but I was a sort of talkative person too, so it wasn't hard to convince him that day. And I kid you not that a few minutes after we entered the trail, somebody's shadow began to block the only way out. This was kind of scary because, it was pitch black, 10:40 p.m, and it was winter, and my phone's light was the only sufficient thing that we had for seeing the silhouette. I think it was a man, definitely not long hair, but I don't know how tall, and I'm not completely sure it was a man. Even though I flashed him with my flashlight from my phone, I still couldn't see the colors of his clothes or body or anything. It was just too dark out and my phone wasn't strong enough, and it had a lightless background. Not even the moonlight was out that night, nor the flame of a lighter that he used could change that as well. It was completely black and he was devoid of color, except for the sort of sub-cattering high of that little flame and my light. He didn't move at all, except when he took the lighter from what I assume was a pocket on him. I was terrified, G was terrified and was grabbing my right arm as if his life depended on it. But no matter how much we were shaking or panicking, that man didn't move. He stood still on the trail without making any type of sound. So I started saying out loud how lucky we were to have brought our knives with us this day, in case we would have found something dangerous. At one point, me and G discussed about calling our parents to take us from there, and that we would have to elaborate a story so that they wouldn't be concerned. But as I turned to watch my phone, G said that we still needed the light on the guy to keep an eye on him, so I immediately raised it in the direction of that man, and I was shocked. G was frantically tapping my arm saying, "He's not there, we need to go," and it was true. In those few seconds, he was out of our vision now, which of course drove us crazy, and prompted us to run faster and faster in the direction from where the streetlights would illuminate everything, making us feel safer. Eventually we got out of the trail, but I could have sworn that I heard someone following us. Of course, I stayed with G for the rest of the evening until we arrived at his house complex. I felt really guilty about getting him to go there that night, and so I accompanied G back home, and it definitely made me feel a little bit better, but I don't know. Maybe it was nothing, and maybe I'm just overthinking it. Maybe the other person was as scared of us as we were of them. Something tells me that whoever that person was, that they were up to no good, and we just so happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I have a series of short stories from when I lived in Utah years ago. These stories, they take place in the time period from 2003 to 2014. I originally come from Utah, but haven't lived there in years, and have lived all over the United States since then. So I've lived in lots of places where they have their own histories, hauntings, and interesting stories. So here's the first ones, well, chronologically speaking anyway. So in 2003, my then stepdad, who was and is abusive, controlling, and treated my mother and my siblings and I horribly, began escalating his behavior. I noticed a pattern that, as he got worse, strange things would happen around the house. Like, family members and I would hear disembodied voices throughout the house. A strange presence would be felt at some times and then not at others. And, most notably, we would see shadow figures running around the house. These were not tall, humanoid figures that you typically think of when you think of shadow figures. These were deformed, almost animal or alien in nature, and moved extremely fast and had an almost impish quality to them. We would occasionally hear a man's voice in the house calling our names too, but we left that house and moved to a different neighborhood north of Salt Lake City in Bountiful, Utah. After settling into our new home in Bountiful in August of 2004, other members of the family began noticing strange things too. Footsteps would be heard in the hallways late at night. My mother would be working in her office at her computer and occasionally hear footsteps, and one night she felt something touch her back even. She turned around and there was obviously nobody there. Later, my brother saw an apparition of a young girl wearing white standing at the end of the hallway. Thinking that it may have been one of my sisters, she went to go and check to see if everything was alright, and the girl just disappeared, and my mum saw that both of my sisters were both still sound asleep in their bedrooms. After doing some research into the history of the house, we learned that a young girl had passed away from leukemia in that same house a number of years prior. Her bedroom, it had been the same room that was my mum's office, and the old photo of the girl who passed away matched the appearance of the apparition that my mother saw at the end of the hallway that night. In 2006, as the behavior of my then stepdad began to become even more abusive, so too did the odd occurrences in the home. Our family dog would frequently panic and bark or howl at nothing in the air, especially when in the basement. The paranormal events culminated in a few members of the family, not me though, seeing about a dozen entities, semi-translucent in appearance, and of ghastly appearance as well, surrounding the former stepdad while he was sitting in his chair one evening. In October of that year, around the same time the apparitions were seen, our family dog tragically died by being attacked by a pack of wild animals, either raccoons or coyotes, in the middle of the night. 2007 and 2008, they were pretty quiet years for the most part, and in 2009 the year opens pretty uneventfully, but activity starts ramping up big time in the spring and early summer. On my brother's birthday, in June of 2009, I lived at my grandparents' house with my family, and I was in the front yard waiting for the rest of the family to come out to the car to go for the birthday outings. About maybe 300 yards away, I see a young woman, wearing what looked like 1980s punk clothing, and her blonde hair in kind of a side ponytail, walking casually down the street, and screaming for help. Her voice didn't sound normal though. It sounded much farther away than a mere 300 yards, and it also sounded kind of, like dreamy almost. Fair enough, it wasn't a neighborhood with lots of houses and trees, and it was on a hill, so the acoustics weren't what sold it for me, but I immediately went inside and told everyone that there was a girl crying for help down the street. We got in the car and drove up and down the streets looking for her. Keep in mind too that it was midday, everyone else was still at work or school. This was literally a few days before summer vacation. So unless she was a resident, which she wasn't, it was a small neighborhood where everybody knew everyone and she didn't look familiar at all. It was unlikely that she could have just disappeared or gone somewhere before we reached her. I later learned that a young lady matching her description died of a drug overdose in the 1980s in that very neighborhood. That same month, in 2009, my family and I went to a cinema to see Monsters vs. Aliens, which had come out in March of that year, and was still playing in the theaters in June. While my brother and I are watching the movie in our seats, my mum leaves with my sister to go to the restroom, and they come back sort of shaken and terrified. "What happened?" I asked after the movie. My mum and sisters then tell me that my mum had been picked up and thrown out of her shoes by an unseen force while walking down the hall. Apparently, when she got off the ground, she was 5 feet from where her shoes were, and they were still standing upright in the spot where she had been standing when she fell. Obviously, I wasn't there to confirm this, but still, with how shaken up they actually were, I do believe that something happened. For the years 2010 to 2011, I didn't live in Utah but had experiences elsewhere. 2012 was relatively tame and had little in the way of notable supernatural experiences. In 2013, I didn't live in Utah but had multiple experiences while living in Tennessee. And then the next Utah stories are, in April, I was staying for a few weeks with my grandparents, and my family and grandparents had gone out one day. They were having a fun day outing and doing some shopping or something. This is in the same neighborhood as the story from 2009, by the way, but knowing in our family history that Grandma's house had some strange activity, the previous owner of the house had actually been murdered, we all knew that there was something off about the house. Well, on one particular day, the vibe was particularly off. I was home alone, chilling out, and in no mood for ghosts, and I felt like there was just a very unwelcome and wrong presence in the house. I had a short temper that day and told them to get lost and leave me the heck alone, and called them a series of horrible insults. I sat down to play guitar and unwind a bit, and then from like 30-ish feet away down the hallway, I heard a woman moaning coming from my grandma's room. I was home alone, and after hearing this noise, my blood just ran cold and I froze. Hello? I managed to choke the word out in as stoic and friendly of a voice as I could muster, but there was no response. To keep myself from soiling my pants and running out of the house, I ended up just sort of scoffing and told myself, it's probably just the cat. My grandma had a tabby cat named Lottie at the time, who was one of my best friends. She later passed away in August of that year due to old age, but I had never before or since heard her cat, or any cat, make a noise like that. It was a human noise. I had an experience a few months back that I still can't shake, as well as other interactions. Maybe it was a dream, but I woke up to my husband yelling my name from downstairs. I yelled back, "What?" and he asked, "Are you going to work?" I reached for my phone and it was 1:20 in the morning. That was when I looked over and my husband was sleeping and snoring next to me. Around February, in my room putting clothes away, so fully awake this time, I heard my husband call my name from downstairs and I yelled back and said my name again. I searched the downstairs after he wouldn't respond, but there was no sign of him. I looked outside and I also saw that his vehicle was gone. Now recently, I was sitting on the couch with my son on my lap, husband sleeping on the other couch, one dog on my left, another one at my feet, when I heard a psst noise to call my cat on my left. Both dogs perk up and look towards it. My husband is still sleeping on my right. I woke him up and asked if he heard it, mostly for comfort I suppose, but I asked my son if he heard it too, but both say no. After that though, I did go through each room in the house and repeated that you are not welcome here, please get out. So far, all has been okay, but I'm still unsure of what I might have been dealing with, and I'm not sure that it's gone too. When my grandfather was young, he helped his father with his line of work, and he often worked in the woods, whether it be helping cut down trees or gathering wood. That's usually where he was. This particular day, they went to this secluded town. When they got there, my grandfather wanted to go and explore the woods a little bit while his father worked. He was warned not to go wandering off too deep into these woods because they were known to be a bit dangerous. However, that's exactly what he did. He ended up getting really lost because he wandered off too far in and he stumbled upon a body of water. Now, this is where it gets a bit weird, and when he told me what occurred here, I could see the absolute fear in his eyes. He told me that a creature, one that was tall and dark, walked out of the swamp. He said that it resembled a woman and had very long hair covering much of her distorted face. She also had a very dark complexion. Whatever it was, it walked out of the swamp and gripped his neck and started to choke him. Then it started to drag him into the water and drown him. He was freaking out obviously and begging for it to let him go, and eventually either it did or he sort of slipped out. By the time that it let him go, he was hysterical though, crying and screaming. It was also nearing dark and somehow his father found him but was confused why his son was so wet. When they went back to town, he explained to the couple who were working with his father what occurred, and they said that they know of that creature. Apparently, a lot of people end up wandering far into those woods and end up dying. They die because that thing apparently drowns them, and my grandfather was very lucky that he was spared. Now, I know that this story might be a little bit difficult to believe, but that's fine. I mean, I believe it because of the look in my grandfather's eyes, who you could see fear in. He's also a very honest man, and I've never known him to be a liar. This all occurred in Morocco back in the 60s, in the northern part of the country. Back when I was a kid, my family and I lived in a pretty old house in Tennessee. The house was built in the 1920s, I believe. It was kind of shaped in a square. Think of a racetrack that you can go around. My sister and I's bedroom door was in the living room, and the hallway was to the left. I used to have reoccurring nightmares and sleep paralysis of a tall man with a hat coming down the hallway to my bedroom, and I would always wake up before he came into my room. Textbook sleep paralysis story, I know, but during summer, my mum would leave me and my 3 siblings home alone while she worked. She would come home tired, and since she low-key had a lot of kids, she didn't like us to immediately stampede her when she arrived home. So, one day, we're all sort of chilling in the living room watching TV while our mum was at work. We were just doing the usual. We heard our mum get home from work early that day, and we were pretty happy about that. We heard the back door open, and she came in talking to her friend on her Bluetooth. She always wore these black leather boots, and we heard them sort of clunking on the floor while she walked and talked towards us. When she was finally almost to the living room, she was at the end of the hallway where I told you guys earlier where I used to see the Shadow Man in my dreams. And you can probably guess that when we got up to greet her in that spot, she wasn't there. We were all pretty stunned by that at the time. My sister immediately called her, and you can probably guess again that she was still at work. I didn't tell my brother about the Shadow Man before, but when I did, he said that he had seen him too in the bathroom, which was in the same hallway. My mother also told me once that she used to hear my little brother calling her name when he wasn't even home. Honestly, I really hated that house. So my family used to celebrate bonfire night when I lived in the UK. If you don't know what that is, well, you probably should have listened in history class. Anyway, our tradition was to buy paper lanterns, write notes to everyone that we lost, put them inside, light them up, and watch them burn out into the sky. It's pretty beautiful now that I think about it. I was at my grandma's when this happened, and we were all in the back garden from memory. After letting go, we cheered and cried, but we were happy. At one point, my memories are a bit hazy, but the things that stood out were so vivid in my head. I was on my mum's shoulders, and everyone was talking about my great aunt, who'd passed several years before. She was the rock to the family, and my first ever memory of my entire life is with her, in fact. Now, the next door neighbor's house was dark, and nobody was inside. For context, there was a small alleyway in between the 2 houses that led to a door to the main road. I couldn't see much as it was nighttime, but I looked at the neighbor's house and around until I saw this little girl with very long white hair, and dressed in all white too. It really felt like she was glowing in the dark almost. She was walking down the alleyway, and I freaked out instantly and started crying and screaming at my mum that there was a girl walking down the alleyway. They checked, but there was no one there. Mum said that I was just too tired and needed to go to get some sleep. Weird from her, since she's a big ghost believer, and so I thought that she would believe me, but anyway, now the next part is extra weird. So I actually got the chance to speak to the neighbors one time after this. I don't know how long after, but I was still pretty young. I used to be a bit of a weird kid that was sociable to anyone. Thank you, ADHD, but the man was a really nice guy with a really cute dog. His dog had jumped over the fence to see me in my grandma's garden while I was playing, and this led to a conversation with the neighbor. I asked outright if they had a kid, and he told me no, and that they were waiting for the dog to pass to try and have one. They were a young couple, and I was honestly pretty shook by this. I told him what I saw that night. He took a while to respond, but when he did, he told me to sit down next to him, and he looked me in the eyes and said, "I believe you. I've already seen her before. Don't worry, you're not crazy." Something like that. And out of nowhere, he drops a bombshell on me saying that, in any case, our brains are like cylinders on a satellite in space being controlled by something, and whatever we perceive as life is just simulation. Obviously, these are not his exact words, but it was something close to this. He continued, "That's why I know you're not lying, and that's why ghosts exist." He looked visibly freaked out, told me that I should leave, and I never ever saw them again after that, which is kind of crazy. It was a very strange experience, both the girl that I saw and the conversation with this guy. I don't know if he actually believed what he was saying or if he was just saying it to try and make me feel better, but whatever the case, it was strange. I have 4 weird experiences from when I was working on ships. The first one was midway across the Atlantic in 2013. Me and a few other cadets, we were on the bridge wing, outdoor part of the wheelhouse, for our celestial navigation project. We saw a light come up from the east, fly at high speed until it was almost directly above us, and make a 90-degree turn and zip over even faster. It was at the altitude that you would expect to see a plane at, but nothing turns when crossing the ocean, and especially that fast. I don't think that people could even survive a turn that quick. Anyway, the second was an animal sighting. This time I was a cadet on another container ship, and we had just left Dutch Harbor, aka heading for Japan. We were about halfway between the two and the 100s of miles from land. It was choppy and overcast, and the mate and I saw a large school of porpoise and seabirds, which typically would indicate that they were following fish. In the middle of the group, though, we see a huge white fin come up that looks like a whale's paddle fin. It could have been a whale, I admit, but we have never seen anything that big before. The third one, though, was definitely the weirdest. I was out of school and working on a seagoing tugboat in the Gulf of Mexico at the time. I didn't see it, but I came up to stand my watch at 15:45, and the 2 guys up there had weird looks on their faces. One looks to the other and says, "Should we tell him?" I ask, and they proceed to say that they had just watched a beach ball-sized bubble with pulsing lights on the inside fly in front of the boat, about 10 feet above water. They said that it was moving against the wind at a constant speed, and the outside of it looked like when there's an oil in a puddle in your driveway. The last one was in the Gulf of Mexico again, and this one was the longest. So me and a few others were sitting in the mess watching TV, and the captain called down on the phone. He asked us if we wanted to see a UFO. We all went up, and 4 of us sat there in the wheelhouse and watched a red light sort of erratically snap from one position to another, a short distance away, for about 2 hours. It would sit in a spot for about 15 to 20 seconds, and then snap to a new position in a straight line and sit there. The best way that I could describe it is that it would be like putting a laser pointer on a wall and jerking it around to a new spot a few inches away. Eventually, though, it just took off at high speed, and, well, that was that. So I worked in the radiology department in a hospital in Cardiff, Wales, UK, for about 3 years as an admin and clerical officer, before getting a promotion working in medicine. During these 3 years, I saw a lot of things, ranging from patients dying in the MRI scanners to patients having an X-ray for inserting a meat thermometer into their urethra. Yeah, that's a real thing. Nights always seem the craziest too, but one time a patient came in with armed police after an altercation which involved a knife in the middle of the city centre, and just so happened that the person he had the altercation with was having an X-ray too. This caused a second altercation right in front of me. Chairs were thrown, a trash bin or two, and then wheelchair even. So I've seen things, some funny, some stressful, some sad, and many bonkers, but this one night, well, it was something scary. So I would start a night shift at about 1900, then would work till about 8:30 in the next morning. This was the standard night shift for our department. We would usually do 3 nights in a row before doing 4 days off. After the 3rd night, you were ready to sleep for a week, let me tell you, but the strange thing was that this was my first night of the 3, so I wasn't tired at all. It started off normal. I arrived at the department, took over from the day staff, logged into my PC. During this time, we usually would set up our phones or tablets to watch movies or maybe even the latest TV series, as there would be a lot of downtime between patients. Like I said too, the first few hours, nothing that interesting. Just your average run-of-the-mill night in radiology. Then it came to my break, and now, before I tell you more, I should probably explain the layout of the hospital. This hospital is the largest in Wales. It's a teaching hospital, and it's pretty old. Now, the best way to get from A to B in this hospital is through what we call the tunnels or the catacombs. These consist of very dimly lit corridors, old abandoned rooms, tunnels, and other creepy sort of decrepit areas. The morgue is also found in these corridors, so it's not a nice place to be during the day, let alone the middle of the night, but it's the quickest way to get to places, if you're staff, that is. There's always been rumors too, and mumblings of strange things happening in these tunnels. Some people say that they saw ghosts in old-fashioned porter uniforms taking wheelchairs to pick up patients. Others say that they have seen shadows following them from the corner of their eyes. But one person has claimed that they were attacked by a person wearing an old nurse's uniform from the 70s. This place is creepy too, even at the best of times. But for me, it just never really fazed me, I guess. I mean, I've been down there hundreds of times before. The worst experience up to this point was having a sluice pipe drip human waste on my head. That in itself was a horror show, but tonight would be something altogether different. And honestly, maybe not even of this physical world. So, like I said before, it was a very quiet night. I had been watching the latest series of One Piece because I'm a bit of a geek. During my downtime, a radiographer or radiology technician for my American friends out there came to take over and cover for me for my break. I decided to go to the 5th floor where the sanctuary, multi-faith chapel, was located. On a night shift, it was one of the most peaceful places in the hospital. But to get there, I had to walk through those tunnels to reach the nearest elevator. I set off on my journey, which would usually take about 15 minutes, scanned my card on the main entrance to the tunnels, and then proceeded to walk through. 2 minutes in, I started to feel like someone was walking behind me, though. It being a busy hospital, and basically the tunnels acted like the highway, I didn't think anything of it. Suddenly, I heard panting, like someone was trying to catch their breath after going for an intense run. I turned around to check, but saw nothing. A bit strange, but thought that it was nothing. Maybe just one of the pipes above my head creaking or a generator pumping. So I carried on walking, but I kept feeling like someone or something was watching me and was walking behind me. Out of sheer confusion and a fear that I missed my turn towards the elevators and found myself in a large section of the tunnels that I've never been in before, littered with old stretchers, beds, hospital furniture and equipment. Some of this stuff was over 50 years old, maybe older, just left to decay in a dark, smelly, decrepit and dusty corridor. This was starting to really creep me out, because in all of this confusion I realized suddenly that I must be lost. It almost felt like I had fallen into the back rooms. Everything sort of looked the same. I could feel a tightening in my chest and could feel the start of a panic attack. I remember clutching my chest and running down a corridor trying to find a signpost or something to tell me where I was. The sense that something was watching me, though, got stronger. Suddenly, I felt something hit my arm in force, almost like someone using a baseball bat. I remember falling to the ground, pulled myself across the floor towards the cold, dusty wall and looked around frantically, trying to find an explanation to what the heck just hit me. Then something caught my eye. It was almost like a black mist with glowing red eyes. It was about 20 meters away from me, just hovering in the middle of the corridor. Was this the thing that had been stalking me the entire time? I got back up and I sprinted. I ran down what felt like 100 different corridors until finally I found a housekeeper or a janitor. He asked me what was wrong because I looked pale, but I couldn't get any words out. He then grabbed me by the arms with a firm grip and said, "Did you see it too?" And that was the last time that I ever stepped foot in those tunnels. To this day, I hear rumors of strange things there. I'm not sure what I saw that night, obviously. Maybe I was tired, maybe I was stressed, maybe it was something though. Why else would the janitor ask me to if I had seen it? What else is down there? Well, I can tell you that one thing is for sure. I won't be going to find out. My experience starts in New Mexico, west of Clayton on 422. I was drilling for a small mom-and-pop company with a hydraulic rig, which only took 2 people to operate, which was my younger brother and I. It was hot that summer and the rig would overheat. It was always during the day, so I told the boss man that we would drill at night and that way there would be no issues. My little brother had the company truck and I had my personal vehicle, which was a 2003 Tahoe. I also had my girlfriend with me at the time, so we agreed to meet at the job site after dark. We live like an hour away in Texas. Anyway, you would pull off 422 just after the road tees to another small town that I don't know the name of, and you would have to open and close at least 5 gates to get to this spot, some steel and some barbed wire even. When I got there, I fired up the rig and generator, turned on the lights to check equipment. Everything seemed good, so I shut it back down to wait for my brother. I folded the back seat down and I was going to try and sleep for a little bit while my brother was headed out towards us, so me and the girlfriend jumped in the back of the Tahoe to get some shut-eye. And that was when I noticed just how pitch black it was in this pasture. There was no moon or no stars, nothing, just darkness about this time, and I see what looks like headlights at a good distance, far enough that it looked just like one headlight instead of 2 separate headlights, which seemed like they were headed our direction, but not from the direction that we came from a different direction, to the east. I was puzzled by this, and we watched this light come down that appeared to be county roads, still thinking that it was headlights, but it still never got close enough that it split into 2 separate lights. So it was still pretty far away, but anyhow, we're sitting there watching it head our direction, and all of a sudden it does a spiral move and disappeared, like as if you were to stand outside with your finger, draw a spiral in the air, but imagine it was like 5 miles away. Seeing this, I instantly knew that it was not a car anymore. I look over at her and ask, "Did you see that?" She did and hugs me tightly as we talked about it, trying to wrap our heads around what we just saw. She points out this red glow that's coming toward us though, toward my truck slowly from the east, and honestly, I was in a state of disbelief sitting there quietly, trying to come up with any logical explanation for what this glowing red mist could be. I thought, it must be a brake light. No, the brake pedal is clear of anything that could press it, and the rig and the generator were off. Looking around for anything as a solution, I look over and ask, "Are you seeing this? I'm not tripping or nothing, right?" She said, "No, this is happening. Let's get out of here." I said, "No, let's see what it wants." About that time, this sort of mist surrounded the back half of my Tahoe. Looking out of the window seemed like looking through a red filter, but not just red, almost like an ultraviolet red, a filter but without the black light. She then said, "Let's go now," and I said wait, trying to figure out what was happening. And that's when I heard a knock on the rear passenger quarter panel. It scared the absolute heck out of both of us. She screamed, which made me panic, so I turned around to start my truck up. I couldn't find the key for a split second, but when I did, I put it in and turned the switch on, but nothing happened. Like the battery was dead. No light, no radio. Then, a split second later, the engine would turn over, but still no lights. There was now a second thud on the rear quarter. The truck turned on. We looked around and everything was normal again. The headlights came on, but we left out of there right then and there, and obviously I didn't drill that well. The boss man did, and we ended up meeting my brother at one of the many gates to get on the property. I tried to tell him what had happened, and he said that something had hit his truck too, but brushed it off as a stick or something. I told my boss about it. He thought that I was at drugs, and to this day still believes this, and honestly, I still don't know what the heck it was. I don't think it wanted to harm us because the whole thing just kind of happened. It didn't seem sort of intended, I suppose. Like I just so happened to be in its path, or it wanted to see what the bright lights were way out in the middle of nowhere. Honestly though, that's a wild guess and I really don't know. But I am wondering if anyone has any similar stories to this, or any information on what this could have been. I have wanted to go back and check it out at some point, but also I really don't want to get shot by a rancher, and honestly, I don't want to experience that again, either. Since my daughter, 18 months, was able to wave, babble, and generally interact with people, she's been interacting with someone or something hiding in our closet. It all started with waving. I made the joke that there's a ghost in there, but at the time I didn't actually believe it. Our dogs like to sleep in the closet, so I just figured that she was waving to her. There was only one problem, though, with that explanation. Anytime she waved, my dog was nowhere near the closet. Then she started babbling. She'd have full-on babble conversations with the closet. We brushed it off as her just being goofy, but sometimes she would hold up toys to show the closet and then babble about it like she was doing a show and tell. Now she's starting to use full sentences, and just this morning she looked over at the closet and said, "Hi, I see you," and waved. This is the first coherent sentence that she has said towards the closet, and it's definitely a little bit unnerving. Again, my dog wasn't in there, and she's laying at the foot of the bed. The closet is a small walk-in style closet. There's some built-in shelving up top, some plastic shelving we added, and the door is off the hinges and leaning against the built-in shelving because it fell off and we need to fix it. There isn't a single thing in there that looks like a human or anything. I've always been a bit sensitive to these things, but more so when I was a kid. I like to think that if there was something in that closet that I would feel it, but now I'm doubting myself. For context, we live in a trailer built in the 80s, not even an old house. As far as I know, the only deaths that have happened in this house were a couple of pets the previous owner had, and when my daughter talks to whatever is in there, she always looks up like a tall person is standing there, rather than a cat or a dog. So I have known about the black-eyed children urban legend for some time, but I may have had an actual encounter with one years ago. This happened in Portland, Oregon, around David Douglas High School. I looked up black-eyed children, and there have actually been a few encounters and reports of them in Portland, back in the 90s, I believe. This encounter, though, happened to me during my high school years, so around 2009 to 2011. I can't remember the exact year, but I want to say I was about 14 at the time, and it was late, around 12 or 1 in the morning. Maybe a bit later, but I believe it was a weekend. Anyway, my brother and I were up watching South Park, and we heard a knocking on our garage window. Then I heard a knocking at our window. We had one of those huge windows that covered the front of the house. The curtains were up, but I peeked out of the side and saw a woman. She looked very pale, with black hair, and her eyes were really dark. Now, she very well could have been a tweaker, I know, but it's the next part that creeps me out the most. So after knocking on the window, she then knocks on the door and asks us to let her in. Me being the person that I am, I'm like, heck no, but my brother, who was like 10 at the time, walks over to the door and says that he's going to let her in. I have to forcibly hold him down until the person leaves. My mum and her boyfriend wake up from hearing me holding down my brother. They ask if somebody knocked on the door, and I tell them what just happened. One thing that I had heard is with black-eyed children encounters that sometimes they'll force people to do things with no recollection of them doing it. Why I bring this up is that I asked my brother if he remembers the lady, the knocking or trying to let her in, and he always tells me that he doesn't. To this day, the experience really creeps me out since I ever first heard of the black-eyed children phenomena, because everyone who has claimed to have had an experience with them have said exactly what I experienced. So I know that this is most likely going to sound made up, and honestly that's why I haven't posted it or shared it anywhere yet, but I just cannot seem to get it off my mind, and I'm wondering if anybody has any information or maybe even a similar experience to compare it with. So, I was out in Long Island, New York around the beginning of the new year 2022 when I went out for a late night drive with two friends of mine. We were about 40 minutes away from my house when we started feeling just a really heavy presence surrounding us as we went down a specific road. My friend asked if we could turn around and go down the other turn instead, but doing that led us to a dead end, so we had to go back. As we drove down the road that felt menacing, we passed a cemetery at one stage which had two what appeared to be humans standing in robes facing a statue of the Blessed Mother and waving what looked like maybe a wand towards it. As we drove by, we noticed that it seemed odd, so we drove into the gate and parked a few feet away from them to watch them. They honestly appeared to be statues at first, but then, without even moving, they started facing us and they started waving their wands over us too. The weirdest thing, though, was that their faces looked largely expressionless, but also had features that really I can only describe as a mix between a witch and maybe a pig. My friend that was driving, he instantly took off upon seeing their faces, and we started to head home, all of us feeling like something malicious was there. As we got further into the drive, we then realized that we were being told to go back in the same direction by the GPS, as the GPS had rerouted us back to the same coordinates that they were at. Needless to say, we did not follow the GPS or go back there, but we all returned home that night, and we also felt sick all night, each of us, which was really weird. Anyway, some time had passed, and I had told another friend of mine about this experience, and he said that he wanted to go there because he had never experienced anything like it. We went, and he started feeling sick as we pulled up again, so he kept driving and we left. But later on that night, he said that he was home with only his girlfriend, and they both heard what seemed to be something running up to the door and violently slamming on it, which also knocked some of the stuff on their shelves down, but when they went looking through the house, there was nobody there. I cannot find any information on anything like this, and I am very tempted to go back, but I just can't get myself to actually do it just yet, out of fear and probably just a lack of understanding. I've been busy dealing with the wake of a family tragedy, but now that things are returning to the new normal, I figured that this was a good time to share this. So first, I'll describe the nightmare. It's a very short dream. It's a very clear memory, just because of how scary it was, I guess, but I was about 4 or 5 years old, perhaps 6 at most, and my twin brother and I had a bunk bed in a room at the farthest end of the house that we grew up in. The nightmare, it had me in my bed looking out the window to see a red sky. The kind that it gets in the early dawn hours before sunrise, but light still colors the sky. The next and the only other thing that I can remember in this nightmare is that a man with crazy blue-colored eyes and a bald head appears at the window and stares right at me. The nightmare ends there, but I remember just how much I screamed and screamed about it. I don't know where my brother was at the time when I woke up screaming, and the only thing that I can remember from when I woke up was having my mum come and get me and calm me down as she took me to her bedroom down the hall. I only remember that so well because I wonder where my dad was at the time. Anyway, fast forward to this May, and my father is in hospital in the country that he lives in, Colombia, and my twin brother and older sister are staying in a hotel about 5 minutes walk away from the hospital that he's staying in the ICU at. One night, after a long day of being there for Dad and for the extended family, my siblings and I return to the hotel and sit together to have a couple of beers and try to relax after all of that. We start discussing things, trying to unwind, but somehow the discussion of nightmares and dreams come up, and I bring up the story that I mentioned earlier. Without missing a beat, my sister straight up explains that had really happened, that some guy really did look through my window and that she remembers the whole thing. My sister, she's 5 years older than my brother and I, so this would make her 9 to 10 years old, had her bedroom adjacent to the bedroom my brother and I shared. Her room faced our front lawn and street, while our room faced the neighbor's house and their driveway, with a very low fence between the two houses. While she didn't get into too much detail about the days before the nightmares or the event, she said that she had been followed by a bald man in a truck as she rode her bike home with some friends a couple of times before. The day immediately before this nightmare was no different, but the man this time actually drove right past the house. At the time, she was a latchkey kid since my brother and I had to go to a special school about 45 minutes away from our hometown. It was for a speech impediment issue that many twins have, and my mum had to pick us up rather than be home for my sister after school. But she was never home alone for more than maybe at max an hour. Anyway, that afternoon and evening was pretty normal as she remembers it. My dad came home from his job. He worked as a part-time cop and worked in a local hardware store, and we all had dinner, did homework, played, and did usual family things before bed. That night, though, at around 12 to 1 in the morning, this bald-headed dude had parked down the street at a small industrial park and walked up to our house and apparently tried to get in through my sister's window, which woke her up, and she screamed when she saw the man nearly opening the window as it wasn't locked. My dad stormed in and tried to shove the guy out or tried to hit him with the nightstick that he had. My sister doesn't remember exactly, but this caused the guy to run off, but only for a short time, as apparently he came back a moment later to try and get into the window in my room. He tried opening the window, but it was locked because my mum didn't want my brother and I to open it, because our bed was right up against it. My sister said that I screamed as loud as I could, and my mum went in to get my brother and I, while my dad tried to go after this guy by running out the front door to chase him. Unfortunately, it was to no avail in the end, as the guy hauled butt right back through our backyard. The way our backyard was situated, it had it backed up right against a small rail yard that is part of the aforementioned small industrial park down the street from us. Between our small neighborhood and the rail yard was a good amount of very dense trees that always made the backyards very, very dark. So my dad, he didn't want to get attacked by him there, so instead he went back inside to our house, called the police, then our elderly neighbor to make sure that they were okay, while our mum took care of us kids. And that was all my sister could remember from that night herself, as this was a very long time ago. Neither of us could recall anything else after that either, and the story just sort of stops right there for both of us. My father sadly passed away in the hospital, so we aren't able to ask him. And given that all of us haven't had the chance to ask our mum yet, maybe we'll ask her soon, but we aren't sure exactly what happened after that. For now, though, it has become obvious that that alleged nightmare that I had, well, it wasn't a nightmare after all. Instead, it was probably an attempted home invasion and a kidnapping. I work full-time as a deputy sheriff in a very rural part of the northern US, right outside of a Native American reservation. Although I do several things for the sheriff's office, I mainly work inside the sheriff's building itself and the jail. In my time in law enforcement, I've seen many things I can't understand, but here are some of the most memorable. Inside the jail lies a medium security housing unit. The inmates stay within their cells from 2200 to 0500. During that time, several inmates are allowed out to assist with cleaning and laundry duties. I've always had a bit of a weird feeling inside of this cell block, but every once in a while my fellow officers, and even some inmates, see a man that we call the Watcher. Late at night, as officers walk the cell block, we will occasionally see a man behind us wearing white inmate worker clothes. Sometimes it's when you turn your head, to check behind you, and sometimes it's right in front of you even. You never seem to know when you'll see him, and a double take results in him always being gone. He appears to every officer the same, and to some senior guys, it's a bit of a rite of passage when for younger officers to ask about the long-haired old guy out of his cell at night. This is also compounded by the fact that odd cries for help are heard occasionally, only for officers to run out of the office checking cell to cell for someone in distress, only to find no one awake. I personally have heard my last name called to me while sitting in this housing unit. I heard it plain as day right next to me, in fact, only for no one to be awake and all the inmates asleep and accounted for. This particular housing unit has a long history of suicides, overdoses, and violent fights for the better majority of the last 3 decades. My first paranormal encounter here started even without my prior knowledge, and other officers only disclosed the information after I inquired. The kitchen is another hotbed of activity too, with the 2 spirits appearing in the same manner and performing the same activities to each that see them. The first, it's a larger man, maybe 6 foot, 250 pounds. Nearly every officer who has seen him describes him in the same context. He can be seen as soon as you unlock the kitchen and look up from your keys. He's dressed in white kitchen worker clothes, standing at the sink washing his hands, as if he's about to start his shift. My first encounters happened right after I was off FTO and started night shift. For nearly 2 weeks straight, I would see him and I would always do a double take, only to see nothing in his place. For weeks I thought I was honestly going crazy, not asking anyone about him. It was only after one day that my supervisor comes running into the office screaming about seeing something in the kitchen, only for his horror to be compounded when I gave an exact description of the individual and the task that he was performing. My supervisor, who is a devout Mormon and a firm critic of anything supernatural, was scared so badly that he refused to enter the kitchen for a very long period of time after that. The second spirit of the kitchen, though, is the exact opposite of the man in white. He is faceless, and only a faint orange glow is seen, the same shade as an inmate jumpsuit perhaps. He's seen when you go to lock the kitchen door. The squeak of an inmate's shoe is heard and an orange glow rushes you as if he's trying to escape the kitchen before the door is closed. The kitchen also has a history of inmate death, with records from the 90s reporting an inmate breaking in and using the kitchen knives to, end his own life. But no place in the entire jail has more horror and terror than the maximum security wing. Activity is non-stop, from random door slamming to lights burning on and off. A personal favorite of mine is when you're in there, inmates can be seen at night walking the top tiers on cameras and in person, only for you to rush in about to confront an inmate for being out past bunk up, only for every door to be secure. There's random screams that are heard coming from areas where no inmates are housed. Footsteps happen so regularly that many officers don't even react anymore. But my all-time favorite is the time when an officer witnessed a female inmate, through one-way glass, exit her cell in the middle of the night without him unlocking it. The inmate proceeded to wrap a noose around her neck, climb the railing and jump off the top tier. Several officers witnessed this happen too. Radio calls to dispatch were made, emergency tones rang out, only for the officers to open the cell block door, make entry, and see nothing. The odd thing about this incident, though, was that this cell block only housed male inmates, but several years prior was a dedicated female housing block. One place in the jail that has been terrible in particular over the last several months or years is Cell 19. It has housed dozens of inmates, but most either have some mental episode that results in them being institutionalized or moved out within a few days. Examples include completely normal inmates going to bed, only for them to wake up in the morning screaming, rushing out and giving evangelical sermons warding off evil. Normal inmates getting housed only to have a horror show of health issues in the day following. Heart attacks, strokes, and seizures for inmates normally of good or moderate health. In the most recent case, an inmate who was a prior co-worker of mine at another job attacked several officers inside the cell following cries for help. It took 6 officers, a taser, pepper spray, and a restraining chair to subdue the guy. The reason why officers responded? He was choking out his cellmate completely without cause. Following this, the inmate was placed in an observation area but was seen taking off his socks and shoving them into his mouth, only for him to be saved from passing out when an officer took them out. The inmate in question the next day was seen looking directly into the camera and breaking his hand seemingly without any pain. That man, mind you, is in his 70s too. Many things can be explained to simply being because of the high-stress environment and the nature of jail, right? But many things experienced by officers with no prior knowledge of the happenings, and the fact that they happen so often is why I felt the need to share this. If you think that any of this is false, then simply consider it entertainment, I suppose, but I can assure you that I've lived through it, and it is not pretty. So I am not one of those people that get sleep paralysis frequently. It hasn't happened since this first time, and as far as I know, the same goes for the others involved. The gist is that 10-ish years ago, me and my best friend and my dad had very similar first sleep paralysis episodes on the same night. Granted, as far as sleep paralysis goes, the experiences were pretty textbook. We each woke up, couldn't move, felt dread and fear, and could see a dark figure barely in a field of vision. In my room, it was squatting in front of my door. My friend says that it was beside his bed, and for my dad, he actually says that it was sitting on his chest, strangling him. I know that these episodes by themselves are pretty textbook, but what I cannot explain is the timing of it, with seemingly no common causal factor between us. At that time, my dad and I were in the same house, but we didn't know about each other's experiences until the next day. As for my friend, he wasn't staying with us that night, but he did live right down the street from us. So, am I wrong for thinking the timing of this is too peculiar? It was the first and only time any of us had had sleep paralysis on the same night, even in the same area. I feel like the odds of that happening must be very small, and if there was in fact nothing peculiar about that night, it must just be a coincidence with stupidly astronomical odds. Nearly a decade later, everyone's stories haven't changed too. That friend and I, we've talked about it a few times since then, and the one time that I've asked my dad about it, he remembered it vividly too. So, to conclude, I still have no explanation for this, and it makes me wonder if there really is something more to sleep paralysis. Do any of you know of any similar cases that were suspiciously coincidental like this? Or maybe there's a potential natural explanation that I've missed. Was this mere coincidence, or just highly strange? last night, I awoke to the unsettling noise of loud banging and my dog's frantic barking. Living alone with my girlfriend, we had grown accustomed to our neighbors' domestic disputes, and I have called the police often on them. I stumbled to the bathroom as the walls there are pretty thin and separated our duplex from theirs. As I approached the bathroom door, the entire house was dark and a tall shadow was in my bathtub. I wasn't wearing my glasses and I am incredibly nearsighted, so I struggled to discern at first whether the shadow was merely the shower curtain or what it was. But then the shadow spoke. I don't know what he said, but the gut-wrenching panic I felt is still fresh. I screamed and fled back to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My girlfriend, now awake and terrified, joined me as I dialed the police. They instructed me to lock the door, but my bedroom doesn't have one. With the banging growing louder and more aggressive, I braced myself against the door, praying that help would arrive in time. To my relief, the police arrived swiftly in only 5 minutes. When I finally emerged from the bedroom, I found that they had dragged him naked from the bathtub because he had been trying to shower, apparently. They were questioning him on my couch, while he was handcuffed, obviously. He was incredibly drunk and had wandered into the wrong house. It was the one night that we forgot to lock our doors. I was a 20-year-old college student, and my friend and I were living and working near her college for the summer. A guy that she worked with, he invited us to a party at his place. The two of us went, along with 3 other friends. We turned out to be the only females at that party. There were at least twice as many guys there. After drinking and playing a few drinking games, people started to leave. A large group of guys was invited to another party and left to go there. Then our 3 other friends decided to go too. It was down to the host, my roommate, and 2 other guys. For some reason, maybe we ran out of alcohol, I can't remember, we decided to go to this other party. Now at this stage, I had had a few drinks, but not enough that I was seriously impaired or anything. My roommate, though, was pretty tipsy by this point. She was walking with her friend from work, and the other 2 guys who had been talking to me at the party were walking close to me and talking to me. At one point, my friend and her co-worker were walking far enough from us to be out of earshot. The 2 guys told me that they knew of a shortcut and tried to get me to follow them down a dark alleyway. I told them that I wanted to stick with the group. They tried to persist for a few minutes, but I was adamant that I did not want to be separated from my roommate. Somehow, mysteriously too, we never actually found the party. The details are a bit fuzzy, but I think they couldn't find the exact location or something. This was the mid-90s, so no one had a cell phone to call or a text to confirm a location or anything. My roommate told her co-worker that she wanted to walk around to find another party because she wasn't ready to go home yet. There were lots of people out, and often you would run into someone who would invite you somewhere. I told her that I just wanted to go home at this point. I was pretty desperate to get away from those guys, actually. My roommate was feeling good, though, and just was not having it. The 2 guys started to whisper to one another at this point, and I was able to hear some of what they were saying. One said, "No, you didn't hear what she said. They live with 4 guys." This was true as well. We had 4 male roommates, which at some point had come up in the conversation earlier. This immediately set off more alarm bells. I continued to argue with my friend, and eventually she realized that we weren't going to find another party. The 2 creepy guys left, and her co-worker walked us home. On the way home, I told them that I wanted to leave because those guys were scaring me, and why. If this were to happen today, I would have called those guys out in front of everyone, and I would have made more of a scene, I guess. I'm just thankful that I still had enough awareness to not go down that alleyway with those guys, because if I had, I really don't know if I would still be here. So this is mostly going to be told from my friend's perspective, based on what she told me. For context, we were at a casino in Las Vegas and had been drinking and gambling pretty much all night. It was around 1 a.m. and we were getting ready to play one more game of roulette before heading back to the hotel. My friend needed to use the bathroom, but I wanted to keep playing, so I let her go by herself. I wish that I had went with her, but I'll now tell the story directly from her point of view. I went to the bathroom, and as I was making my way back, a guy approached me with this really creepy grin on his face. He appeared to be alone and was recording me with his phone. He walked up to me and said, "Hey sexy, do you have a boyfriend?" I said yes and kept walking, keeping my head down, and he proceeds to follow me while recording on his phone. He asked me if my boyfriend was here with me, and I said yes, he's over there, and pointed to where I was sitting. He responded by saying, "Oh my goodness, he's so average looking. You could do so much better." I just ignored him, and I started walking faster at this point. He then said, "Can I come back to your hotel with you? I want to have my way with you." I yelled at him to leave me alone, and he started laughing like a madman. He said, "Why are you being like that?" At this point, my friend made it back to our table, and I could tell that something was wrong. This dude was still standing next to her recording, and he said, "Your girl is terrible, you know." This really ticked me off, and I got in his face and told him that if he didn't leave us alone, I was going to knock him out, and he pulls out pepper spray and started shaking it up. I jumped back and grabbed my friend, and luckily we saw a sheriff's deputy standing a few feet away, and he could tell that something was up. I flagged him down and told him what was going on, but the creepy guy was gone by this point. In fact, he completely vanished from sight. After the whole ordeal, we were exhausted, and we took a cab back to the hotel. Now, about a week later, I was on Facebook and saw an article about a guy claiming to be an incel who was arrested for going around recording himself pepper spraying and harassing women, and lo and behold, it was the same guy who harassed my friend at the casino. His name was Johnny Devan Young, for anyone who wants to look him up, but the guy gave me such a bad vibe, and I remember seeing him just walking around the casino by himself before the incident happened. It was a strange experience, and I don't know what this guy was up to really, if he was just trying to bait for reactions or what, but the fact that he invited me back to his place, that scares me a little bit. I work at a homeless shelter for men in a fairly large Midwestern city. It's rewarding work, but the pay isn't great. Listening to these guys' stories and experiences, though, leaves me feeling incredibly grateful and humble. Many are mentally ill, addicted, alcoholic, or some combination of the three. A few are truly men who are down on their luck, victims of other people's mistakes, but it's rare. Generally speaking, almost all are local, as there is literally nothing to bring you to this city besides either work or family. Which brings me to Carl. He creeped me out from the beginning. He's not from here. In fact, he's from the West Coast, which is easily a 2-day drive. He's a bit of an outdoorsy type with a kayak on top of his SUV. This made me suspicious from the beginning. Why would someone who loved the outdoors leave the West to come here? He is never drunk or high, perfectly well spoken, and no obvious mental health problems like so many of these fellow residents. His backstory makes no sense as well, but I mean, they rarely do here. He was yet another extremely rich, successful man who got screwed in some vague and never believable way and ended up homeless. In fact, the residents here are all misunderstood geniuses, musicians, brilliant salesmen, former athletes that should have been pro, etc., etc., and they all got screwed by something or someone. It's all stories, and his was really no different. Carl, though, is different. Well-spoken, worldly, extremely polite and educated. So why is he here? Is he on the run? We don't allow the police to come in looking for anyone unless we called them ourselves. It's a perfect place to hide, I guess, for someone running from something. So he's from out of state with some weird backstory of how he ended up here. I gave up the rat race, packed up, and this is where I ran out of money. Sure, bud. He's trying to befriend me, and it creeps me out a bit. Anyway, I caught him alone by the dumpsters yesterday. He was shirtless on a mat, looking like a praying Muslim or someone doing yoga deep in thought. But that's when I noticed that his tattoos were all satanic. That goat head guy on a man's body and something written in Latin. When he noticed me, he grabbed something quickly and put it in his back pocket. No idea what it was, but I told him that he couldn't be back here, and he complied. He was also chanting something I couldn't make out before he noticed me. Something about blood, I think. It was really creepy and very scary, in fact. He hasn't done anything wrong per se, and we can't kick someone out for being creepy or practicing their religion. But it's another day at the shelter now, and I have to continue to deal with this guy, and I guess I'm just wondering if you guys have any ideas as to what I should do about any of this. So, I've been up since like 5 a.m. and I just cannot get this out of my mind. Last night, I'm sleeping and I'm having a nightmare that I'm in an apartment looking into a kitchen area, and the drawers, cabinets, and a door to the pantry were all opening, closing, and moving by themselves, almost like poltergeist activity. I was scared in the dream, so I began praying, and then my wife, who was in the bed next to me, kicked my foot and woke me up because I was clearly distressed and mumbling a lot in my sleep. But here is where things get really weird. So I just sort of jump awake because my wife kicked my foot, and feeling relieved to not be having a nightmare anymore, I turn my head towards my wife, who is laying behind me. I'm really sorry about that, I was having a nightmare. But I don't hear any response, so I figured that she's already fallen back to sleep or whatever, or might just be too tired and she's still kind of out of it. Then I turned my head back to facing forwards, the direction that I was facing the whole time that I was sleeping, and I noticed something in the corner of the room, standing in front of the bedroom door. The room was dark, but its skin still appeared to be like a dark matte grey color. It was really thin, had thin legs and long thin arms, a small, almost like torso, a narrow neck, and then a really big bulbous head with huge black almond-shaped eyes. What I'm getting at is that it looked exactly like a traditional grey alien, but it was also slightly transparent. Needless to say, I was completely shocked, and to be honest, my very first reaction was that I was seeing things because I just woke up. So I sort of rubbed my eyes and it's still right there. Trying not to panic and trying to come up with a rational explanation for it, I thought to myself that this must just be a dream, like chemicals still working in my brain or something. So I sit up slightly and look into the corner of our bedroom by the closet, expecting to see something there too, but there's nothing. Then I look at the ceiling, nothing. The floor, the other wall, nothing. I look back at the corner of the bedroom and it is still right there, standing there completely still, just staring at me with its huge jet black eyes, which were shaped like almonds and appeared to sort of wrap just slightly around the side of its head, much, much larger than a human's eyes. And it's still slightly transparent, but I am definitely seeing it clearly, and only in that one spot too, not anywhere else in the room. Now, because the Texas power grid really sucks, I always sleep with a flashlight next to the bed, and after seeing this thing for about a minute and a half, it occurs to me to grab the flashlight. I lean off the bed, reach down and grab the flashlight, and shine it in the corner of the room at this being, and because it's transparent, it became much less visible when I shined the light on it, but I could still see it very slightly, but it was now much more difficult to see. Again, in disbelief at what I was seeing, I began slowly scanning the whole room with the flashlight, from the bed of course. I wasn't going to try and get out of bed, I was way too scared. And again, I see absolutely nothing strange anywhere else in the room at all, except for this thing that I can see in the one corner of my bedroom door. I turn the flashlight off and instantly I can see it super clearly again, just staring at me. I rub my eyes again and squeeze my eyes together tightly, hoping that when I opened them it would be gone, but it wasn't. So I finally begin truly freaking out internally, and I just began praying out loud. After about 20 seconds of praying, I literally watched this thing just sort of fade out of existence or dematerialize right in front of me. It was still standing there dead still and staring at me the whole time. It just seemed to suddenly begin becoming increasingly transparent until it was just, well, not there anymore and it was gone. I've been awake since then, spent the rest of the night reading random stuff here on Reddit to try and distract myself because the experience really shook me up quite a bit. I was wondering if anyone else here has had an experience like this. I feel so genuinely weirded out that I just don't know what to make of it. Did I really just see that? So I read somewhere that you can see your true self in front of a mirror by using lights. Not here, of course, but just some random post on the net. As I dove deeper with that stupid post, I tried doing it. First, I just stared into the mirror for a few minutes with the lights open. Nothing happened. And yes, I did it at dawn at around 2 or 4 in the morning. I tried many things too. I literally experimented in front of the mirror as I have nothing much to do anyway. I bought different LEDs with different colors just to see my face in the mirror with different colors. I kept doing it the following days. Every time I would sit in front of the mirror, I always used different colors of lights. I did that for about 8 days straight, and nothing happened. On day number 9, though, I started to get bold and thought of using lights coming from a candle. I still doubt that something will happen, obviously, but to my mistake, just a few minutes later, something really did happen. It was 3:56 a.m. at that time. I kept a note on what time I did those stupid experiments. As I started in front of the mirror with the candle lights, things started to go from bad to worse. At first, I thought something just got into my eyes, but I know that it wasn't. That face of mine, that very reflection of my face, began to distort. I was stunned for a moment, shivering all over my body and not knowing what to do. That distorted reflection of mine began to look deeply into my own eyes, slightly smiling, a visible arc on the side of the mouth. As I was stunned and didn't know what to do because I really wasn't expecting it, I just sort of stared back at it. I tried to move, but my body wasn't listening to me. I was in that position for about 40 seconds of dread. As I was about to lose it and almost started crying, everything returned to normal. Of course, the first thing that I did was to put down that candle light and turn the lights on. I was really scared that time, but I also felt elated because, well, I succeeded after 9 days. I wasn't able to sleep properly that day, thinking that my reflection would kill me or whatever. I'm not even kidding, I was actually really scared about that. I continued with my daily routine though, except staring in the mirror again obviously, and nothing happened. But just a week ago, strange things started to happen. I've been living alone for like 3 years now, and I'm working at home too. And I know this sounds weird, but I can literally feel someone's presence when I'm working, that someone is eyeing me. Sometimes I see some black hazy figure on my peripheral vision, but when I turn to look at it, there's never anyone there. I got shivers most of the time, but I just kept on ignoring it. And things like that continued to happen, and just 3 days ago, when I woke up, the door to my room was slightly opened, like someone might have been peeking through the door. I just ignored it again, thinking that I must have just forgot to close it. But that kind of thing just really shouldn't happen to me because I always lock the door after entering my room. And today, the worst thing happened. My door was slightly opened again, and this time I saw a bloodshot eye peeking at my door. It was fleeting, but I know what I saw. It was that black figure again with the eyes that I saw on my reflection before with the candlelights. I'm literally shivering right now while sharing this. I'm trying to find that stupid post again so that I can do something about it, but I can't. And, as crazy as it sounds, I think that I invited an unwanted guest into my own home. If you have any ideas on what I can do about all of this, then please do let me know. I'm afraid that strange things will continue to happen and that things just seem to be going from bad to worse.